Hey everybody, happy Thursday. Welcome to the Thursday edition of the TechStrong TV streaming broadcast. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Thursday, December 17th. Let's get started with today's program, which is chock full of great interviews, starting with an interview that Alan had with Ori Karen of a company called Linear B. This is the first time that we've talked with anybody from Linear B. I think it's a brand new company. They help dev teams build and ship faster using software delivery intelligence. So Alan and Ori have a conversation kind of parsing out what exactly software delivery intelligence is and how it can help organizations. So definitely an interesting conversation worth checking out. We also have a conversation that Alan has with John Egan from Kintaba. Kintaba is, I think it's another brand new company, and it's made up of former Facebook folks. They are bringing next generation incident management to market. New product offering, a new chapter in incident management, if you will. And so definitely, again, another conversation worth taking the time and listening to. We also have another edition of the Cyber Hero Adventures show with Gary Berman. He takes a look at why information sharing and analysis centers, also called ISACs, why they are the key to winning the battle in the digital universe. He has on his show Denise Anderson, who is the president of the National Council of ISACs, Scott Algiers, who is a president of IT at ISAC, Faye Francie, who is a president of Auto ISAC, and Carlos Kazee, who's a president retail and hospitality at ISAC. So they talk about the roles that they play and the role that ISAC plays in battling cybersecurity foes and winning in the digital universe. So definitely give this one a check out. Then on our Something Old section, we have Rob Hirschfeld from Racken from the DevOps Experience Virtual Summit we held earlier this year. He had a very fascinating talk called Nope, That's Not Infrastructure as Code. In his session, he talks about how infrastructure code has really been marketed as the answer to all automation problems. But we all know that that is so not the case. So he decided to talk about this as the result of a conversation that he had on Twitter. It was a tweet battle, actually. Then Rob asked what really is a definition for infrastructure as code. And so this talk basically distills the conversation that he had with many folks who answered, and kind of got into contentious waters here and there. But he basically talks about the specific and actionable ideas that can impact and hopefully will impact the way you think about building automation for scale and distributed systems in when we talk about infrastructure as code. Then I come on and I have a great conversation with a gentleman by the name of Chris Hickman. He's with a company called Keyfactor. And we talk a lot about actually digital certificates and the way they can be misused. We've been hearing about so many different cyber threats this year, and digital certificate misuse is definitely one of the things organizations really need to consider in their cybersecurity strategy. So he and I talk about some of the different ways that organizations have had their digital certificates misused. And also we talk a little bit about some of the cryptography predictions for the coming year. So definitely a great conversation. Definitely one you want to check out. All right, after that, Mitch Ashley comes on, and he has a conversation with Richard Steinen, who is an author and chief research analyst with IT Harvest. They talk about the SolarWinds data breach that happened earlier this week, and really whether organizations should patch their SolarWinds implementations right away or whether they should wait a little bit. So they kind of parse through the information that's come through so far about the data breach, including who the alleged perpetrators are people think they are, and talk about basically the anatomy of the data breach, and what happened, how FireEye is also involved, and maybe offer up a couple lessons learned that organizations can use as takeaways when they're using their SolarWinds implementations, whether they should patch, whether they should hold off, and basically offers a bit of a roadmap for organizations to follow. Following Mitch's conversation with Richard, we have an interview with Volterra. Specifically, Mike Vizard speaks with Mark Wiener, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Volterra. Volterra is a provider of hybrid cloud computing, and they talk about how far along the path toward cloud-native applications based on Kubernetes clusters most enterprise IT organizations maybe really where they are these days, and maybe where they would like to be. So Mark and Mike have a really fascinating conversation about that, and it actually kind of level sets the landscape a little bit better for organizations who might actually be considering adopting Kubernetes clusters, maybe not so far down the path. It should hopefully help organizations recognize that maybe they're not as far behind as they think they are. After that, Mike Vizard has another interview, this one with Trilio. Trilio CEO David Safai, actually. He speaks with Mike about why data protection in Kubernetes environments really needs to run natively. The company just recently picked up an additional $15 million in funding, and their technology is really focuses on the Kubernetes space and data protection. So Trilio is definitely one of the players in the emerging container security space, which is growing more popular and a bigger part of the conversation as organizations are adopting containers in Kubernetes. So definitely this conversation between Mike and David is one worth checking out. All right, as I said, we have a jam-packed session for today, and we're going to go ahead and get started right after this commercial break.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, first up on TechStrong TV, we have an interview between Alan and Ori Karen of Linear B when they talk about the company which helps dev teams build and ship faster with software delivery intelligence. So let's give this one a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another episode here of TechStrong TV. Our guest for this segment on TechStrong TV is Ori Karen. Ori is the co-founder and CEO of a new company, at least new, well, it's a fairly new company and new to our audience. I'm going to let him introduce it. Ori, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks very much for having me, Alan.
It's my pleasure. Ori, let's start. I set it up. Let's start the company, what you guys do, maybe a little of your own background, and we'll go from there.
That's great. So Linear B, we're building a software delivery intelligence platform. Basically, we identified that there's a problem in how software projects are being delivered in this era. So you can think about Git and CI/CD systems that did like a complete shift left, and then they're now harnessing like the great power of a dev-first approach and developers like using them. And we think there's two areas like project management tools and engineering efficiency tools that are now emerging that didn't do that step. And this is why we're building Linear B. So basically a software delivery intelligent platform will try to solve those problems a little bit better. So for example, instead of making developers work for a project management tool and drag tasks to done and keep them updated with manual labor, we offer a better way to do it based on what our customers are saying to us, which is great for us. We built a very strong technology that connects to all the development pipeline, to like Git, project management, CI/CD, and we correlate all the information and reconstruct an image of where the project is. This way, like we're taking work off developers instead of saying, hey, why don't you like update all the tests, or the management can see where the project is. So that's one aspect of what Linear B is doing. The other one is while we're at it, like we have great visibility to all the metrics and everything that's happening and all the bottlenecks that are happening in the dev, progress. And we're coming to this with I think a different approach a little bit from the engineering efficiency tools, because I think the development organization is the last that was not fully digitized. It's like, I can tell you a little bit about my background later, but I was sitting in board meetings as a VP of R&D and always had like the not so good slides to tell about, oh, here's where we stand. So I can see a lot of initiatives to improve that. I think the main issue is that those engineering efficiency tools are coming with a top-down approach. So, and the right way to do something in this industry is with a bottom-up, get adoption of developers, help teams operate better. Once you solve that problem, you can go up the stack and have great dashboards for managers. And maybe one last element is that humans are creating software. I was a developer throughout a lot of my career. And we think that, especially in these days, there's an importance to make sure that, people are not burned out and people are not overloaded. So if you put all of this together, this is what Linear B is all about, make a cozy home, yet efficient for dev teams.
Love it. So a couple of things. First of all, let's get out of the way very first. Linear B, the website is linearb.com or yeah?
Linearb.io. That's our website.
.io. All the new companies are IO. And that's LINEAR with the letter B.
Yeah, straight like.
Okay. All right. So, it's an interesting premise, Ari, and I see parallels to it actually in the whole DevSecOps thing. What we've seen in the last 20 years, right, is kind of, look, we saw the rise of Agile, which was a very developer-focused, method. So we shifted, in that shifting left, we shifted more and more to the developer. We shifted testing to the developer. We shifted security to the developer. We shifted deployment, CI/CD, on the developer. At the same time, we're asking that developer to do Agile Scrum, right? And you look at the tools that evolved, to work in a Scrum environment, right? And whether it's Scale or Safe or what have you. And then you look at things like Git and, again, a developer-centric tool originally, a repository really. And then, now we have GitOps where we're moving the ops in there. So we're putting more and more. And it's funny, it's the most in-demand position, it's the highest paying position, it's the highest pressure position. But yet we keep putting more, straws on the camel's back there and wonder why it bursts when people burn out or can't get it done on time. So I think we do need a little bit of a rebalancing, right? Not that we should shift right necessarily, I'm not saying that, but we need to rebalance. And part of that is having tools that I think more accurately reflect how the modern delivery should work, right? Or does work, in fact.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because if you think about it, shift left in project management, it's not actually adding more tasks to developers. It's taking tasks off them, right? Yep. Instead of them like updating things and I keep saying, there's a joke that we're saying like it's 2020, cars are driving themselves, but developers still need to drag manually tasks to done. So yeah, shift left here means exactly what you say, Alan. Like take work off them and give them back time, give them like value.
Yeah, no, let them do what we're paying them a lot of money to do, which is develop. Right?
Develop,
so
build, ship.
Yeah. I mean, we see it even here in media ops in my company, right? We're not big software development shop per se. We use a lot of off the shelf, tools and SaaS kind of stuff. But we recently went through a whole review of our operations, and we realized that the project management aspect, even like stitching together the virtual environments that we use and everything, having a good project manager with a good project management tool and team is as important as the people who are writing. In our case, it's CSS, Python, easy kind of stuff, because we're just kind of more stitching than we are building. But we're putting it together, and that's where our focus now is. Right? Manage these things correctly. Try to get away from that last minute stuff, because we put so much on. In our case, it's more of a web interface developer. But I think you're onto something with it. Let's talk a little bit about your background, though.
Yeah. So I started as a developer. I think. I started coding at the age of 10, but I actually did more stuff at the childhood, which was a happy childhood and great. But then, when I got my first job as a developer, I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I really loved it, really connected to it. Then I grew and became like a team leader and a VP of engineering. I had two interesting journeys with companies. That we scaled like the engineering organization up to 100 people. Both were startups that were acquired by AT&T and Cisco, big companies. And after I left Cisco, me and my co-founder Dan Lyons, we kind of said, hey, we gotta help the dev leaders, because again, when we came into the board meetings or the staff meetings on Monday, we felt always like, we want the same flashy dashboard that Salesforce can create for the VP of sales. And we actually were envying the conversation that the VP of sales had with the CEO. It's not just about showing the data. The CEO really understood the dev process, the sales process, right? So there's not enough pipeline. We're not going to sell enough. We wanted the same for to happen for dev, because it's like two parallel universes. We wanted to build a company that bridges that. And when that happens, and we have customers that are saying to us, "Hey, it's amazing, it's happening to us," then you can unleash the power of development, because the best companies in the world were when great developers understood the business need. And that's where great things happen. So this is my background: a developer, then VP of R&D, and now first time founder.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on being a first time founder.
Thank you.
I founded or co-founded 5 or 6 companies over the years, and you know what they say? It's kind of like buying a boat. The best days of owning a boat, the day you buy it and the day you sell it. But I don't want to discourage you. There's a lot of fun in between, but it's hard work. But here, let me ask you, I'll tell you another thing, and we spoke a little bit about it off camera. I've never met a successful founder, entrepreneur, who didn't think that in some way, sometimes it's a little way, sometimes a big way, what they're doing is somehow going to change the world. So how is Linear B going to change the world?
Yeah, I love this question, because if you think about it, software is eating the world everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And then I can also see, and I think you agree with me, that data is coming to the software teams. It's happening. If 5 years ago you would go into a dev team, and say, "No, it's an art. You can't you can't really understand and measure what's happening here. So there's acknowledgement that it's time. There's a new generation who lives and breathes data all the time. So it's going to happen. We are here, Linear B is here to make sure it's happening in the right way. So, you know, we want to make a dent in how people like working in software delivery. And we think we're in a good spot to do that. We want to be there for every dev team, help them. I think there's even a room for like a next generation of agile, which is more modern, more like suitable for 2020. Sounds like a very big mission and very ambitious, but that's what we want to do. We want to change how, you know, software delivery projects are being delivered, and we think we're in a good position to do that.
Good. Excellent, man. So, Ori, let me, you know, our audience tends to be a little technical, more than a little. Let's peel it back a little bit. How are you providing this automation? You integrating into GitOps kind of things? Right? You know, what's the developer experience there? What about how do other team members, the security folks, the QA, the ops team, how do they integrate into what Linear B is doing? Give us a little insight.
Yeah, so we invested a lot in the integrations. We first like integrate into every Git product that's out there, to a lot of like project management tools that's out there. We're connecting to Slack and Microsoft Teams. By the way, not as a source of information, but more as a medium to send alerts when something is happening. Give you some simple, concrete example. For example, and it was very helpful now in the COVID days. Like a developer would push a pull request. They want to merge new code, and they're waiting now for this to be merged. Our system knows how to identify it and alert the right people. And you can customize this whole experience and say, who do you want to get alerts from? We invested a lot. I would say it's a combination of, you know, how good the integrations are, statistics and big data, and user experience. Because if you send like 7 of these to a developer and interrupt them, they will throw you out. So you got to be very delicate, and it's all about, you know, how you send alerts on the right things. So this is why we had to build such a strong technology and run with a lot of design partners to make sure it's right. So we collect all the data, we reconstruct the image of where the project is and where is it stuck. Again, using some machine learning, but a lot of this is user experience. And yeah, you asked about the QA people love, like the test automation people love like Linear B, because all of a sudden they know, without asking the developers, they can see, oh, this story that it's about to be released, it's this big, and I can see that it's already shipping. We reduce the interruptions of people asking, hey, when is this being shipped? Like in 50%. So people can just work. So this is why everybody's getting value. Like you said, the test automation people. We have some integrations around security. So for example, security and quality. For example, when a pull request is going up and it doesn't have enough tests, we will offer, hey, why don't you like add some more tests here and maybe get some top reviewer to review, maybe even two to review this. So it's all about those workflow automation, which I think is going to be, by the way, a huge thing in 2021 in general. So I hope it kind of like helped like to peel and understand, like to peel the layers and explain what Linear B does.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So Ori, let's turn now to kind of the business side of it. How is this offered to in the market? Is it obvious? I would imagine it's a SaaS type of thing, but how's it priced? How is there a free trial or a free version? Or talk to us how are people going to use it out there? How can they get it?
Yeah. So since you asked me why we want to change the world, so first of all, what we did, hey, every dev team that wants to use Linear B, if you're a single dev team, you can use it for free. That's the first thing. You have a free offering. If you're a single dev team, it doesn't matter if that's your entire organization or you're a dev team that sits in like a big company, you can use Linear B for free for up to like one team with 8 people. So that's like one thing that we did. And then we have like layers. The pricing model is based on, the size of your team usually. We want everybody in the team to have access, of course, to the product, because our belief it's not a manager tool. It's like everybody is using this, every developer, every team leader, every frontline manager. So it's priced on, how many people are in the team. That's like the pricing model. I think those are the important things. We have more elements and more like, advanced packages, but for the basics, like this is like how it works. You can come to linearb.io and just start. Judge us, see if it works for you.
All right. And then the company is funded at this point? You've raised money, or is it bootstrapped? What's the situation?
We've raised seed round, and we're growing. We're probably, somewhere next year we'll raise more money.
Based in Silicon Valley, yeah?
We're actually an interesting company. I'm talking to you from Tel Aviv.
Oh, good.
And my co-founder, which is a great friend of mine, I recommend to every entrepreneur out there, go to business with people that you trust 100%. So he's almost like a brother. He is in California. So we're a distributed company from the beginning.
As many are today. I didn't realize. I thought you were coming from California. So it's nighttime there as you're recording this. I appreciate you staying up for us. It's actually not too late there, because we're recording this around 11:30 East Coast time. So it's probably about 6, 7 o'clock at night there.
Yeah, 6:30. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. That is great. So, what do you? Of course, launching a company during COVID times is a little unusual, right? Plenty of people are doing it, but what challenges do you think that's presented to you?
I don't have a lot of a benchmark to compare to, what would have happened if we didn't launch in COVID. It happened to us. We reacted. We actually, are growing quarter by quarter and in significant portions, significant amounts. If you think about it, it kind of, we're on the side that people need this tool more when they work remote, because I can't just tap on the shoulder, hey, can you help me with this thing? So this tool is helping more, team that are remote, which is basically everyone in these days. I don't think it's all about, as a founder first, the most basic and element thing, make sure all your employees are healthy, secure. Those are like the things that we went and did. Got some protocols on how to work. Yeah, so I think those are the things. I think, funding wise, I can see people are a little bit more conservative, and they're thinking of it. You need to plan, because there's a lot of unpredictability. So you need to just be ready to this unpredictability. That's the one thing that I've seen change. We're actually very successful with startups and scale-ups. And these guys are buying, via Zoom. So it's not that, we need to take somebody to lunch and enterprise sales. So it didn't hurt us a lot.
No. Well, you're remote. You're remote by design anyway. Being in multi-home areas, you're remote. And a funny thing, Ori, is I was talking to someone last week or earlier this week about buying patterns in COVID for IT and SaaS. I mean, and you know what? All of a sudden, people are comfortable making $500,000 contracts and purchases over Zoom, right? Yeah. They don't need necessarily that in person, and so I think that plays in your favor too. And look, if there's one industry that's done well, there's a lot of suffering in the world, so I'm not bragging, but the tech industry, right? Because we needed to, right? So much depends on what we're developing and these applications getting pushed out and all of that. Anyway, yeah, Ori, we're about out of time. I told you the time goes quick here, man. I want to wish you lots of luck with LinearB. Come back, keep us posted as you guys continue to progress, and good luck, man.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me, Alan. This was great.
Our pleasure. Hey, Ori Karen, co-founder, CEO at LinearB. That's linearb.io. Check them out. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with another guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Up next, we've got Alan speaking with John Egan of Kintaba. They talk about next-gen incident management. So let's definitely give this one a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on another episode for TechStrong TV. Our episode now features a new, well, they came out in February. They're what I like to call a COVID baby company called Kintaba. And we have with us John Egan, who's the CEO, co-founder there. Hey, John, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hey, Alan, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, John, as I mentioned in the outset, there's this whole class of companies that have been born during COVID. And certainly an interesting time to launch a company. You guys, if I'm not mistaken, launched right on the cusp, right before, like February, when stuff was just perking up. For me personally, my last conference was the RSA conference at the end of February in San Francisco. Came home from there and like a week later shut the office. Tell us a little bit. Well, let's start with Kintaba, what you guys do, what your background is, what your personal background is, and then we'll talk about the exciting fun and adventures of launching a company. During COVID.
So Kintaba is an incident management platform, and we're designed to take the overhead and the busy work out of implementing a modern incident management process inside of your organization. So our background is primarily as Facebook engineers and product managers, where previously I was running a big chunk of the internal tools teams, as well as founded the team inside of Facebook that built Facebook Workplace, which is Facebook's enterprise team, and grew that team actually out in London. But Kintaba really comes from an experience we had after we left Facebook and started our own organization, and realized how much firefighting we were doing, just like all organizations are on fire, right? How much firefighting we were doing as a small company. And we went to all of our other friends who had recently left Facebook and gone out to other Silicon Valley darlings and unicorns and large mature companies. And we said, look, you guys have infinitely deep pockets at your organizations. What tools are you using to go and manage these major outages, expecting them to give us, this clear winner in the space that we should go and adopt inside of our company. And instead, what we heard from all of these companies, the big ones, the little ones, the medium-sized ones, is they all were sort of cobbling together these processes for running the entire incident management process based off of, sort of pieces of what they'd seen at Facebook, of what they'd seen in like the Google SRE book, and what maybe their other friends had brought in, and what sort of had won, through battles of other executives at their organizations. And we took away from this observation that was, there really isn't a one-click tool out there for just turning on best practice incident management. And that's really the genesis of where Kintaba came from. So we moved the whole company over from what we were originally planning to do. And we said, no, we're gonna build this tool instead.
Absolutely. It reminds me, John, I'm an serial entrepreneur. I've started co-found 5-6 different companies. And I've over the years had a chance to speak with, interview, work with hundreds of entrepreneurs. And the single biggest thing I always hear is, well, our biggest competitor is a spreadsheet, right? Because it's not normally when, everybody wants to do something that's going to sort of change the world. And when they do, it's not that, there's this great technology or tool that we're looking to displace or disrupt per se. It's usually that disrupting a spreadsheet, right? That because if there was a good solution, you wouldn't it would be hard to raise money or to go fight a good solution. When you don't see, when there's a lack of a good solution in the market, it's generally an indication that this is ripe for a good solution, right? And that's kind of, it sounds so easy to, when you think about it that way. But, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that fact pattern.
Definitely, and as a lifetime tools builder, this is what we're always looking for when we're building tools. We're looking for sort of a either collection of sort of loosely knitted together tools that people are already trying to use, and then the only thing holding those tools together tends to be sort of like the aggressive human will, of the manager or the person who's trying to make it happen. And I think incident management is the perfect example of this, right? Because at the outside, it appears to be this pretty simple thing, right? We'll come together, we'll solve the incident, we'll write a postmortem. But the reality is there's a lot more to it. There's awareness of the incident, there's consistency in the declaration process, there's how you're defining your responders and your subscribers, there's how you're writing your postmortem and making sure that it's distributed out to the team, there's making sure you come together as a team after the fact to actually read that postmortem and look back and adjust your processes. There are all these little pieces, and Kantaba is really about that. It's about taking all of that busy work and noise that no one wants to do day to day, right? And letting computers do it, which is what they're good at. And so I think one of the unique things about us is we really let humans solve these problems. We help companies solve the top 1% of outages, right? We are major incident outage or incident management. And this is black swan events, right? This is a tornado just took out your data center. This is your entire site is down, and from 1 million users a day, you're down to 0, right? These are the situations where the last thing you want to be doing is administrative overhead and communications management. And what you really want to be doing is focusing on solving the problem. And that's really the piece that we take on here. And we really consider ourselves purists when it comes to it's an incident management solution, in that once it's installed, you shouldn't be managing anymore. You should be working your incidents.
Makes a ton of sense. I'm going to dive more into that in a second, John. But as I mentioned at the top of the show, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it's been like launching into probably the most unusual, you want to talk about incident response and incident management, the most unusual set of circumstances and environment, certainly in, all of our lifetimes. Challenges, yes. Opportunities, yes. But what's it been like for Kantaba?
So we were just launching Kantaba back at the early DevOps days, here in New York. I think it was late January or early February. I was there, and it was the first conference we'd sponsored. And I remember the country was just kind of wrapping its head around the idea of even wearing masks. I don't know if you remember, but at the time, the news organizations weren't even aligned in terms of, should we be wearing these things? Do they make it worse?
Well,
it seems so obvious.
We didn't have enough masks. So there was, do the mask help? I think at some point the historians will write the book on this, John. And I think what it's going to come out is we didn't have enough masks for healthcare professionals, and they were afraid by doing massive mask adoption, there wouldn't be masks for the people who really, really, really needed it at the time.
But it was incredible after that, how quickly, we moved from a state of we're starting to think about this problem to this is a countrywide, a worldwide situation. And, I see everything as incidents, right? As an incident management product maker. But, this is the Sev 1 for the world. And very much just like incidents sort of evolve over time, the coronavirus and the response to it had to evolve. And when we were talking to customers, it actually was interesting because we were able to point to coronavirus as an example within their organization of a major incident that they had no control over, which is something that I'm sure is difficult for companies to kind of get over when they're implementing proper incident management, is getting away from this blame world, right? Like, you're at fault, this is your fault, this is your fault. Coronavirus has given every company in the world an experience with a major company impacting situation that isn't an employee's fault, but that they need to go and solve for. And I think in some ways it's been useful for us as a storytelling device when we're talking to organizations that are really just stepping in and they're saying, well, what is major incident management versus, alerting. I've already got pager duty and it's sending me alerts when things go down. And now we have an interesting example we can point to at the world. It's like this is a SEV1. This is what a SEV1 looks like. It's a company critical problem. And now we have country critical problems and world critical problems. So, building this product inside of a major incident, for the world has actually been a pretty unique experience for us, and honestly has influenced some of the way that we've built the product out, and some of the storytelling that we use to help organizations understand the cultural value of practicing incident management at all for companies that aren't doing it yet.
I agree. It's a very incident response centric view of what's going on with COVID, but it's not untrue either, right? It's very apropos. So, companies funded?
Yep, we're funded. We've got about 2.25 million in the bank. Raised lead from First Mark here in New York, actually.
Fantastic. And so, COVID has certainly had a change. As you mentioned, you sponsored the first DevOps Days. I don't think there's been an in-person DevOps Day since March or April, something like that. Everything's virtual. We've done our fair share of DevOps Day coverages over the years. Of course, we haven't been doing many lately. But so how are you going to market with this, John?
So a lot of it's been word of mouth just coming out of the gate. We have a couple of friends in industry who started using our product in the early days. We've got a few companies out there that are on our site now that have nice links. Vercel is one of our big users out of the gate. Let's Do This, Canix, very good security. These are all organizations that started working with us early on, or heard about us through word of mouth when we were first coming out of the gate and working with some of our pilot customers. So we've really leaned mostly on that in the early days. The tech community, I'm sure, as you know, especially the DevOps community, it's very closely knit. And it's been a big advantage to us kind of over the last couple of months, giving us time to refine, really make sure that processes and systems we're putting in place work at all sorts of scales. We were working with companies as small as 2 or 3 people, and we've got a few companies that are thousands of people. And I think that's really what we've done with go-to-market initially, which I think is the healthiest thing you can do when you're building a tool. You want to start with that group of people who can really help you mold. And then now we're a little bit more in a growth phase, and certainly kicking up our advertising, and we're sponsoring SRECon, which is happening right now, and a couple other conferences as everyone's moving virtual. And going forward, I think we'll continue to work on awareness and exposure and rely on word of mouth as much as we can. But I think we're onto something pretty unique here, and I think as this kind of wave of acceptance of incident management hits, which to be clear is new for a lot of companies. We in the DevOps bubble think of this as the obvious, everyone must practice incident management, but it's actually in a lot of ways a wave that's really pushing across tech organizations that previously didn't think about it as anything separate from alerting. And as that happens, I think Kintaba can really live as an organization on the front lines of helping companies go and adopt those practices, processes, and honestly, the culture.
I again agree. I don't want to be in violent agreement. It makes for a boring interview, but I agree wholeheartedly with you. John, for our audience out here, let's flesh out a little bit what the offering looks like. So is this kind of an agent that runs on your infrastructure and then talking to like a SaaS backend kind of thing, or I'm guessing.
So it's a SaaS service. It's a website. If you go directly to it, you can actually sign up for free. We're one of the few incident management products out there like this, where you can just click a button and start using it. But the experience itself it's broken down into a couple of different parts, which sort of encompasses incident management. It's a dashboard ability into what's currently happening in the company from an incident standpoint, who's responding to it, and what happened recently. It's a declaration space for going in and defining an incident. It's a collaborative space where you actually run your command center for who are your responders, who are your subscribers, what are the systems you've plugged in, Zoom, Slack, Jira, et cetera. And then what's the status of the incident and how's the timeline going? And then it's a postmortem editor for actually going in and writing your retrospective. And we help you do this with automated widgets and connectivity back to the timeline. And then finally, it's even a scheduling agent for going and scheduling the review meeting and putting together the postmortems you're going to look at as a team when that happens. So at its front end, it's a piece of software that everyone in your your company should have access to. We don't just sell into SRE teams. We sell into entire organizations. So your customer success team is in there, your PR team, your legal team, your sales team. Everyone in the company needs to have visibility into these things, and sometimes also be responders. If you've got a PII system that's been compromised, you probably need your legal team involved. And we allow all of that through our system. You talk about us being an agent. We're also an agent. In the back end, we're connected into Slack, and we have bi-directional connectivity there. So your engineers can still work where they're used to working, but maybe your CIO or your PR manager doesn't want to go into the engineering Slack channel to have the conversation. They can access it through the Kintaba UI. So we have a lot of the depth to the product when it comes to sort of feature capability. But at its top, it really just feels like an interface for viewing what's currently happening, isn't happening inside of your organization from a major incident management standpoint.
Fair. What about pricing? You mentioned there is a free version, but how's the price beyond that?
Yeah, so first 5 users free. Beyond 5 users, we've got a couple of different tiers. There's a basic tier, which I think runs as low as $9 a month per user. A small team can pull this in and start operating for under $50 a month. And then as you scale up and you add on enterprise features, SSO, guaranteed SLAs, and all those fun things, price scales up to a kind of book value of about $16 a user. And then of course we have enterprise agreements if you're a super large enterprise and need to negotiate a site license or otherwise.
Yeah. Sounds
I believe really fair, really cleanly.
So it's a per user model. It's a per user model, basically. Very cool. Excellent. Hey, you know what we didn't mention, John? Website, I'm going to assume it's Kintaba, KINTOBA.com.
KINTABA.com. Yes.
Thank you. I could say I did that on purpose just to make sure you were paying attention, but I didn't. I misspelled it. Kintaba with an A. Yeah?
That's right. Yep.
All right. Hey, John, thanks for telling our audience. We like to discover companies we haven't heard of before. So this is a great one. Thanks for coming on and telling us all about it. Continued success. Come back and visit us again soon. Give us an update on what's going on at Kintaba.
Great. I'm really excited to come back sometime in the future. I also just want to highlight we've got a new feature coming out in automation.
Oh, we didn't even talk about that. I'm sorry, John. Let's talk about it. What do you got new?
Yeah, we've got a great new feature coming out. It actually might have come out by the time this interview goes live, called Automations, which takes on even more of the process overhead for companies while you're in the process of responding. So what it does is it handles conditional actions inside of your incident response process. So for example, if you're working an incident and you mark that incident is affecting PII, the automation system can go in and automatically say, okay, that means I need to go grab the on-call for legal. I need to go and escalate this up to this other SRE team that's specialized in those systems. And then maybe you move it up to a SEV1, and the automation product will go out and say, okay, great, I also need to pull the CIO in. So it's sort of an if this, then that system baked into the incident response process to remove even more of that human decision making. So if the people who are responding don't necessarily know who needs to be involved, Kintaba can come in and help attach the right individuals to the incident as the incident evolves.
Excellent, man. It's called Automations.
Called Automations, that's right.
And it's just built into the product as is. It's not like an extra add-on.
That's right, built into the product, free for anyone already using Kintaba, and should be right there on your dashboard for configuration.
Very cool. Hey, thanks for letting us know about that.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Alan.
Thank you. John Egan, CEO, co-founder at Kintaba for Incident Response. Check them out. We'll be right back with our next guest here on TechStrong TV.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
All right, next up we have another edition of the Cyber Hero Adventures Show with Gary Berman. He talks with members of the Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, and they talk about their role in winning the battle in the digital universe. So let's listen.
Hello, and welcome to the Cyber Hero Adventures Show. Today's show focuses on answering the question, why are information sharing and analysis centers, ISACs, the key to winning the battle in the digital universe? Stay tuned to find out. I'm your host, Gary Berman. Our mission is to shine the light on the people and organizations who keep us safe online while at work, home, and school, and to serve as a business-to-business networking platform for the cybersecurity and IT communities. We've learned that 55% of human communications is nonverbal. That's why we include a video feed, so that you have the option of seeing our guests or simply to just listen. You never know who you're going to connect with and how you'll be able to maximize opportunities resulting from hearing from our great guests. As the victim of a series of cyber attacks, I've learned that the only time that you're about hacking your cybersecurity is when the criminals win. Well, not anymore. Let's begin by saying thank you to today's panel of unsung cyber heroes who represent the countless people who toil in anonymity to keep us safe at home, work, and school. Denise Anderson currently serves as chair of the National Council of ISACs, and she is president of the Health Information Sharing and Analysis Center, HISAC. Prior to HISAC, she was the vice president of FS-ISAC Financial Services, where for almost 9 years she helped the ISAC grow and achieve its successful status in the information sharing community. She has over 25 years of executive management level experience in the private sector. Hi Denise, welcome to the show.
Hi Gary.
Scott Algier is the Executive Director of the Information Technology Information Sharing and Analysis Center, IT-ISAC, and Executive Director of the Industry Consortium for Advancement of Security on the Internet, Kazee. Scott works at the intersection of cybersecurity policy and operations. He is the founder, president, and CEO of the cybersecurity consulting firm Conrad Inc. Hey Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gary, for having me. Thank you.
Faye Francie is the Executive Director of the Auto ISAC. She has over 30 years of diverse experience in government and industry, specializing in forensic chemistry, aviation, security, and network systems. Faye and her team serve the global automotive industry through the analysis and sharing of trusted and timely cybersecurity threat information about existing or potential cyber-related threats and vulnerabilities for on-road vehicle electronics and associated networks. Hi Faye, so glad that you're here.
Hi, greetings Gary and all. Thank you. Thank you for having us today.
Last but not least, Carlos Kazee is the Vice President of Intelligence at the Retail and Hospitality Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Carlos has significant government-to-government and government-to-industry legal and policy interpretation and development experience in the areas of information technology, knowledge management, sensitive information sharing, and sensitive information protection. Hey Carlos, so glad that you're here.
Gary, I am honored to be here with these folks who have over a century of experience in this field.
Denise, we're going to learn a lot about what all of you do on today's show, but I'd like to begin by asking, why do you do it? What is your mission? Please tell us your origin story.
So I consider myself an evangelist for information sharing. I've done it all over the globe, and it's not an easy thing to do. People don't share information for a lot of reasons, but I've been doing it for a long time, and I realized actually one time I was on stage speaking, and I started thinking about it. I was like, I've actually been doing information sharing for decades before I actually did an ISAC. I was actually in credit and collections for a large media organization, and we would meet monthly to share information with each other about debtors and fraud. And it was the same kind of thing. It's all about community and getting people to understand that helping each other helps the entire community. And that's my mission, I think, is to get people to understand that and believe it and do it.
Well, thanks so much, Denise. Scott, tell our audience exactly what is critical infrastructure, and tell us about CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency.
Sure. Thank you, Gary. So there actually is a legal definition of what critical infrastructure is, but it's best to, I think about critical infrastructure in broader terms instead of the legal terms. So critical infrastructure are those technologies and services that you need to enhance the economic security of the country and the public health and safety of the citizens. So things such as power, communications, health. These are core elements of the critical infrastructure. There's 16 critical infrastructure, designated critical infrastructure sectors. Many of these are managed by the Department of Homeland Security. Others are managed by other sector-specific agencies. For example, the Department of Treasury works very closely with the financial services sectors. And this is really important because the concept of critical infrastructures the majority of them are owned by industry, but it's a national security concern that these are secure. So the whole concept of what we've been working on together over the last 20 years or so is getting industry and government to collaborate in a partnership. And this entails collaboration on policy issues, as well as operational cyber threat information sharing issues to help the industry and government better understand what the threat is and to take protective measures against the adversaries.
Faye, how would you assess the state of vehicle cybersecurity?
Well, the overall state of the vehicle cybersecurity, as we know, is emerging, right? So it's pretty exciting times for the automotive industry overall, with the movement towards autonomous vehicles and more, right? Including vehicles that fly in the air and land in various places, urban mobility vehicles. So lots is happening in the industry. With that, of course, with COVID, that was a major impact to all of us, as we know. And now they did pivot very quickly to support the nation in building those ventilators. And several of our members did that. So we really take our hat off and thank them for their ability to do that and move into a manufacturing space of what was really, truly needed at the moment. They are starting to get back. Obviously, with COVID still very active, things are a little slower than normal. As far as the industry goes. But having said that, we haven't stopped here in the ISAC. So things are very active here. And in fact, as we know, as COVID is happening, there are other opportunities for those bad guys to try to play some nefarious tricks and so forth on us. So we are seeing upticks in certainly ransomware. We are seeing upticks in malware insertion across the industry. And so we've been probably more active than we've been in the past, actually, as this COVID has hit.
Carlos, given the incredible disruption in the retail and hospitality sectors, how do you get people to focus on cybersecurity?
Well, that is a really, really good question. It's significant to recognize, I think, that everybody is impacted, has been impacted by COVID. Faye brings out a really, really good point. The threat actors have not changed in the sense that, hey, we're going to give you a break. In fact, they've done just the opposite, and they've been even more opportunistic. I think retail and hospitality are not unique in terms of all of the sectors. If you were to ask Gary which of the sectors is more or most vulnerable, generally, or even at this time, I think the only actual great answer would be all of them, because we are all battling against an aggressive and opponent that is well-connected, that's entrepreneurial. And I think retail and hospitality, while at a little bit of a disadvantage because you fund security with revenue from sales and activities like that, we recognize that we have to be on our game all of the time. Our companies are adjusting to that dynamic, with new themes of the same old activities and threat actor activity and things of that nature. I think the one key to our sector is we don't necessarily have to challenge or encourage people to work together. The margins are so tight. The threat is so great. And the importance of security is so, tantamount, because we can't sell in e-commerce if we, don't have a secure infrastructure and a trusted infrastructure that people have confidence in. So people are willing to work together. This is my third ISAC, the current position I'm in now, working in. And I've seen in no other sector the amount of willingness and eagerness to work together across company boundaries and even across verticals within our sectors of industry. So it's a real attractive environment for what Denise had talked about, collaboration and partnership and, effective information sharing, both threats as well as vulnerabilities and best practices.
Gary, if I could chime in, I was just, because Carlos teed something up in my mind. All of our members of our ISACs are competitors, but if you noticed, I never used competition as a reason for why people don't share information, and it shouldn't be a reason. And that's what's amazing about all this, is that these companies understand why it's so important to be sharing with each other, because it is, again, a community, it is an ecosystem, and we all rely on each other to make sure that we are able to even exist as industries. So, I think it's really a lot of kudos for those companies and organizations that belong to ISACs and really believe in information sharing, because competition is just not even a factor.
Denise, you're involved with the National Council of ISACs, which of course is the umbrella of all the different ISACs. Tell us a little bit about that and your mission within that.
Absolutely not. I mean, really, we all work really well together. We're kind of like an ISAC for ISACs, so to speak. Interestingly enough, we have 26 members now. So not all the sectors have ISACs. Some have operating components, but many sectors have subsectors. So for example, in transportation, or let's go energy because it's a little simpler. Energy, we have oil and gas, downstream natural gas, electricity. So there's a pipeline is another factor. So many of those subsectors have ISACs, and then they share information. As far as the council is concerned, we've been around for over 15 years. We're a voluntary body, so we've been around for a long time. And it's where the ISACs got together and said, you know what, we have challenges and common issues that we face. Let's share information with each other. Why not? And the cross-sector is so important. And I can't say enough about how we share information with each other. I mean, I consider Scott, Carlos, Faye, and many of the others that are members of the National Council of ISACs as true friends that I know I can rely on if I ever needed to get help in a certain area. And when an incident happens, we're immediately deciding, hey, is this something bigger than our own ISAC? Is this affecting the cross-sector? Should we be sharing with each other? So we're constantly thinking that way and working with each other to make sure that we're solving issues that arise.
So what are your views about Russian and other hackers trying to infiltrate into our biomedical infrastructure to steal intellectual property about vaccines and all that?
So I'm not surprised, because this is something that goes around. It goes on all the time, so it's not new to COVID. Obviously, there's a little bit of a spotlight on it now, and there's been a lot of articles in the media about the hospitals being extremely targeted during COVID. We're not seeing that really as a sector. I mean, yes, it's kind of, we do see some targeting, but I would say it's more opportunistic versus actual abnormal targeting. The pharmaceutical manufacturing firms and the medical device manufacturing firms are constantly under attack from nation states who want to get their intellectual property. So it's not really anything new, so to speak. Some of that's going on, but I would say it's not anything out of the ordinary, if that makes sense.
So Scott, what's your take on some of the platform attacks such as Twitter?
Yeah, sure. So I think the situation Denise was just talking about, which is where these nation states targeting private sector infrastructure, I think is a really important point. If you don't mind, if I talk a little bit more about that first, and that is, in private industry now, we're expected to defend against nation state attacks, who are very well funded, highly sophisticated, And I think very few organizations can do this on their own. So one of the values that the information sharing community brings is the ability to cost effectively scale internal cybersecurity capabilities and programs. Because now instead of just having your own internal team of analysts, you can compare notes and talk to other analysts from peer companies who are experiencing the same attacks from the same threat actors. So it really gives you an excellent forum to share knowledge with each other, and it helps scale your costs, because nobody can hire all of these analysts internally, but now you have access to these analysts who are more than willing to share with you, and because they're fighting the same battle you are. So it's a really an excellent way to help scale up capabilities and try and make it more manageable for these organizations to combat these nation-state actors. I think, on the Twitter attack specifically, I think there's a lot yet to be learned about that attack and how it happened and what happened. So looking forward to hearing more about it. But it also highlights the concept that everybody is vulnerable, right? There's not a company in the world that is not vulnerable to a well-organized and well-orchestrated attack, whether it's from a nation state or smart hackers.
Faye, you're in an industry that is incredibly supplier-driven. What are your thoughts, or what are your best recommendations on how to secure the supply chain?
Well, it's a great point, Gary, right? So the supply chain could be considered maybe the soft underbelly. Like if they couldn't get into the OEM, can they get in through perhaps a supplier, a tier 2, tier 3 supplier? So they're definitely a potential vector. And so it's really critical that that supply chain and all that the manufacturers do are aligned, that there are cyber best practices. And one of the things we did in automotive is when we started, we decided to build 7 best practices that the members wanted to look at. And they determined what they were, they helped build them. And basically what that did was bring in the whole of the industry to pull together, to build these best practices, to understand together. And there's so much more work to be done along those lines of how does that impact contracts? What does that look like? What do we do from what you were talking about, the CMCC activities, the ISO and SAE standards development. There's a lot of work being done now along the idea of the entire supply chain, right? Making sure that we do the critical work that's needed to support everyone, to educate everyone. As Denise said, this is really a lot about education, communication. And of course, it does change the way we do business today versus what we did in the past when there was no cyber attack.
Gary, I'm sorry, I was going to, if I could just add to that, for retail and hospitality and everybody that's involved in e-commerce or brick and mortar sales or anything, we're so dependent on third parties. We can't, there's such a high number of people who are involved, the third parties that are involved in transactions, and managing their security, the impact of them on our compliance and our security. We're all learning how to do that better. We're all learning how to do that together. And we're bringing in people into the conversation that aren't necessarily the security people, because third parties can have an impact on security, they can have an impact on efficiency, they can have an impact on compliance. And so it's within each of the companies, it's also kind of creating a focus and a sell. It's not just a security problem. It's the marketing, the chief digital, it's, everybody working together, chief legal.
Oh, sorry, Gary. I was just going to say, too, some of the major attacks we've had were through third parties. Petya, not Petya. Yeah. That was through an impacted accounting firm in Ukraine that if you did business in Ukraine, you had to do your accounting and taxes through this one of 2 firms, and one of them was this one that got impacted. And it had major, major consequences across the globe. So just amazing.
Carlos, in the cybersecurity ecosystem, much of the conversation is focused on large enterprises. In your sectors of retail and hospitality, you have a lot of small to medium-sized businesses. All things considered, how is it going? How would you assess things for the SMB segment?
That's a very, very good question. I think every ISAC has a culture, and Denise kind of articulated it well when she was describing the National Council as well as describing her ISAC journey. I think that one of the key elements of an ISAC, because we're sector-wide, we're looking at a sector of industry, is our ISACs are always going to be diverse. We're going to be diverse in terms of size and in terms of maturity. And I think that's one argument in favor of the ISAC model, because that diversity gives us a bit of strength in the sense that there's always somebody that has tackled that problem before me and maybe has a novel solution set or a unique perspective about the range of solutions that I can learn from. And I think that lends itself to a highly collaborative environment. I think that for small and medium-sized companies, or for companies that have less maturity in terms of security, being a part of an ISAC is essential. It's critical. And I think for larger, more mature companies that have the ability to invest more in terms of security, having the opportunity to connect and coordinate with their peers in a neutral sort of non-antitrust environment like an ISAC is essential. So I would almost say that the business case for connection within an ISAC and membership in an ISAC pretty much has nothing to do with your size or your maturity.
And for our audience, we're going to be including some information about how to become a member of an ISAC. Carlos, you mentioned about diversity. What are your thoughts about best practices pertaining to increasing diversity within the IT and cybersecurity ecosystems?
I love that question. I really appreciate you asking that question also. I think that there are two facets of that problem in our society today. I think that when we look at Black Lives Matter, when we look at Me Too, and when we look at just the general perception of fairness, what it boils down to is we have to inspire and maintain an environment of opportunity for everyone, right? And that opportunity has to not have anything to do with the amount of resources available to a particular school system or location. And I think that we have to intentionally make investments in that area to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I think one facet of our current environment is opportunity, just ensuring that there's opportunity. I think the other facet of it is that, if you go back to kindergarten, first grade, when you got those little report cards and you were evaluated on good citizenship, works and plays well together with others, that's really important. Why that isn't in every report card all the way through, the 12th grade and beyond, I don't get it, because the biggest problems that I see, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's Me Too or anything else, it's not necessarily the root cause isn't necessarily the color, the heritage, or the gender, or other perspectives. The root cause is an inability or an unwillingness to give basic dignity and respect to someone else for whatever reason. And so as managers, as supervisors, as peers, as mentors, we have to instill within leadership and within our organizational cultures a perspective that dignity and respect is something that adds value, adds capability and capacity to our mission. There are a countless number of geniuses that for one reason or another, we have probably pushed away because we failed to give them the dignity and respect that would allow them to thrive in our environments. And whatever the other issues are, the root cause, in my opinion, is that absence of dignity and respect.
And Faye, you're nodding your head. Would you like to amplify what we just heard from Carlos?
No, I think Carlos did a beautiful job on it. Communication, respect, dignity, all of these are really critical elements, and it's critical elements to everything that we do in an ISAC. We work with a very wide variety of folks, of course, across the ISACs with different company structures, rules, etc. And this platform has to mimic that as well.
Yeah. One thing, Gary, I'd just like to add, we have a tremendous opportunity. I think all of us as organizations do. There's quite a large number of historically Black colleges and universities and historical Hispanic institutions that have great cyber programs. And the challenge for, from me to Pure ISACs and other organizations, many of whom are already doing this, is to reach out to those institutions, have capture the flag exercises, tabletop exercises among their cyber talent. You'll be very, very impressed with the hunger, the appetite, and the need for mentorship, that exists in those communities. And so I think there's some great talent there just waiting to be plucked and pulled into situations of importance in our organizations.
I think role modeling too. I mean, being a role model and showing that it can be done, I think is really important.
Denise, it's really interesting that you talk about the word role models, because my better half, who's the smart one of our family, Valerie, has recently written a blog post about influencers versus role models and what is the difference. And what I can tell you with complete certainty is all of you are just world-class role models. So thanks so much for who you are and what you're doing. And Carlos, I think you just gave me the title for this episode, Works Well and Plays Nice with Others. So join an ISAC. So Scott, speaking of working well and playing nice with others, everything that's going on, how do you manage stress?
Do I manage stress? Well, that's a really interesting question. I go for walks. I need time to decompress. I try to do one in the morning and before I start the day to get my mind around what I need to do. I try to do one in the evening to get my mind around what I just did and what I missed, and try and do some deep, some more strategic thinking. One of the things that occurs to me, and I think others, is that we get so caught up in all of the urgent items that are occurring. We all have 1,000 things to do, both with work and family, people working from home. There's now more family obligations with everyone at home. Just you're so busy doing throughout the day, doing the things that need to get done, that I find for myself having some quiet alone time where I can think about more strategically about what I've accomplished and how I need to do things differently is really important. And then I also, in the morning, it's also important to have a good spiritual life and have someone else know that there's a higher purpose to what I'm doing, other than just to get throughout the day. So it's really important for me to balance, my private time to help my mental health and my spiritual health.
One of the interesting things that I experienced having been the CEO of a marketing company and I lost everything, and many families the same way, was to seek out kind of a North Star. And I happened upon a quote from Albert Einstein that really has proved prescient in my life, when a reporter asked him by saying, Mr. Einstein, on one hand you have science and physics and mathematics, and on the other hand you have the possible existence of God. How do you kind of reconcile those two worldviews? And he famously replied, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. So if you hear me say this is an Einstein moment, that's the reference. So Denise, can you share with us an Einstein moment that you've had?
The thing that immediately pops into my mind is I was working as a publisher for a cleaning magazine, actually, believe it or not. And
cleaning? Did you say?
Yeah, cleaning. Yeah.
Like cleaning things?
Cleaning houses and buildings. Yeah.
Wow.
So, very interesting. A very interesting field, and actually very important nowadays with COVID.
Yes.
But so when I had first joined the organization, I met one of the people that served on the board of directors. It was an actual association for cleaning contractors, and he was an entrepreneur. He had started his own company, and very successful man, very nice man. He was a bear of a man, really, a really kind of gentle giant. Whatever image that brings to your mind, that's who he was. But he was so welcoming. He wrote me a letter. He said, "Oh, Denise, we're so glad you joined us, blah, blah, blah." And he was just the nicest person in the world. And one day he had come up for a board meeting. It was actually a committee meeting for the magazine that we produced, and he didn't show up. And they went and checked at his hotel room, and they found him on the floor. He had passed away, unfortunately. And it was, we were all shocked. It was very sad. But one day I was sitting in my office, and my office overlooked a busy street, and it had like a ledge that was probably like an inch wide. And a bird all of a sudden perched there on my windowsill and started tweeting, and then it flew away. So I didn't really think anything of it other than, wow, that's odd. That's never happened before. And later that day, I had written an editorial in the magazine about his, this person and just how great he was and what he had done for the community. And his wife called me that day, and she said, Denise, that was such a beautiful tribute.
Faye, why don't you share with our audience an Einstein moment if you have one?
One of the, I'll really make this personal and talk about, my own career in the Boeing company. And I really morphed from aviation and air traffic management into, sort of managing a very large portfolio in Boeing for network systems. And ultimately, we could sort of start to see the beginnings of this, what I call this cyber tsunami coming. And it concerned me particularly on the commercial side of the business, where we weren't doing a whole lot protecting our aviation networks. And so I did a little research, and I did a little homework, and I learned about the National Council of ISACs, and I was able to meet Denise Anderson and Scott Algier, who were in the National Council of ISACs. I got to meet them, and ultimately, I sort of also knocked on the government's door, and I got to meet Carlos, who was at DHS at the time. And so I pulled together what I thought was a plan of action for aviation to go take a look at that, and I gave them that information. And it just kept reminding me what great folks that were over on this side working it, and how cool it was to be in a nonprofit and to sharing information and securing the whole of industry. I really loved it, but of course I had to go back to the position that I was in. And I made 3 predictions thanks to pretty much these guys that are on here helping me understand that problem a little bit better. And those 3 predictions actually came through. So those are probably the Einstein moments inside of Boeing, which I won't talk more about. But through that, it basically catapulted me back into ISAC land to go do an aviation ISAC, and ultimately, when I retired from Boeing, brought me over to automotive. And I remember Denise telling me at one point, she said, just start sharing, and whatever you do, it'll come, right? And I'll never forget that. In fact, I use that all the time. Just start doing it, right? And one of the challenges we've been having is bringing in IT and OT, because we're very product focused. And I use that same quote again. And so here it is 15 years later, I think it is, Denise, I'm still using your quote. So it really was a great moment for me to meet all of these folks. They are incredible leaders across the community. They do amazing things, and I've learned so much from them. And it's so nice to end my career working together with these types of folks. So thanks.
Who says it's the end? Guys. Who says it's the end?
Well, sooner or later.
It's going to be much later, because a rising tide lifts all ships. Carlos, you want to share a moment?
I would. One thing that was really, and it's very similar to Faye's story, but working in the Department of Homeland Security, as Scott had alluded to, predecessor organization to CISA, same and similar work and activity, had the privilege of working with ISAC organizations, and I always wondered, what is the glue that keeps them together? Because one thing I never saw when, we meet with companies, we meet with associations, and I always see competition, company to company, association to association. But whenever I met with an ISAC, I saw a solidarity, a purpose and of intent. And that was really, really cool. And one of the things I was committed to do is kind of, being equal to their, excellence on the government side, which I don't think I did a good job of, but we tried, sort of. But I did meet at one point a lady named Susie Squire, who was pulling together an ISAC organization to broadly cover what was then the retail sector. But it was clearly not just retail. It was gaming casinos. It was, hotels, and it was, consumer packaged goods. It's like this, huge, thing, and they were doing it the right way. And I was so encouraged and so inspired by people who are entrepreneurial in this area of doing good. We see organizations today, that are coming about like, our Maritime Transportation System ISAC, our Space ISAC, new members of the National Council of ISACs, that we're continuing that sort of development. So long time ago, I kind of thought, wouldn't it be cool to not be in government where, you get a little frustrated sometimes with trying to make things work, but having so many barriers, impediments, and obstacles. And I remember having a short conversation with Susie that, wow, I envy what you're doing and where you are. You need to connect with this National Council of ISACs as well, but I just envy where you are. And now I think it's about 10 years later, I'm working for Susie Squire at the Retail and Hospitality ISAC. So it's just interesting how things come full circle. And I could not be more privileged or proud to be a part of the organization.
Well, I don't know if you can see from my screen or your view, but I'm actually getting goosebumps from that story.
Hey, Gary, if I may, I don't, I have a lot of Einstein moments in my life and like spiritual moments, but some would say I have some Hello McFly moments too in my life. I think influencers in my life and in my professional experience, there were people who came before us, right? So we've been doing this a long time, but the late great Howard Schmidt, when he was with Microsoft, helped to establish the IT ISAC. When I first got my role, when I first got my start here, there was a gentleman named Guy Copeland, who was the original graybeard of the industry and forming industry government partnerships. Our colleague John Sabo, when he was with the IT ISAC, he helped form the National Council of ISACs. So there were, and one of the great things being in my position is that we've had a tradition in the IT ISAC up until a couple of years ago, where we every year we had a new president. So I had great leaders come through as presidents of the IT ISAC, including Marianne Davidson, the chief security officer at Oracle, and then other people who have become friends of mine. So it's really a collaborative community. The cybersecurity world it's big, but it's also really small. And there's especially in this information sharing space, while I'm really have been lucky to kind of really fall into this space. I started as a temp to help out somebody who had this as part of his portfolio. So it's been great, opportunity to be here and grow. But it's also, we need to recognize that there were people who helped pave the way for us, and there was a blank slate when they started over, and they laid excellent foundations for us. And part of my mission, and I talk about it with my team, and I talk about it with others, is my mission is to carry on the great work that came before me.
Well said.
Denise, one of the things that I'm sure our audience is curious about is, can you just help us understand, dimensionalize, if you will, the size of the ISAC ecosystem? How many member companies are there? How far is the reach? That kind of thing.
So I think Carlos said it earlier. You've seen one ISAC. You've seen one ISAC. So I think every one of the various ISACs is different and have different models in how they operate, although we're very similar on a basic level. Like in healthcare, for example, we have pharmaceutical manufacturers, medical device manufacturers, actual hospitals, small practices, x-rays, laboratory, radiological, pharmacies, and payers, so your insurance companies. So we have a very diverse group of people. Other ISACs are very specialized in their group. And our members, I'd say one thing that we have in common is our members are organizations, and within those organizations, they have employees. So you could have one organization and maybe 20 of their employees are participating actively in the ISAC. So you compound that by the number of organizations that are members of the various ISACs. But it depends on the nature of your sector. For example, freight rail, there's only 9 freight rail companies, so you're a little bit limited in scope on who's going to be a member of your organization as compared to something like financial services, where there's tons of banks and markets and credit unions across the globe.
And Carlos, is there anything else that you'd like our audience to know to amplify your mission?
I think that there's a lot of depth to our sector and to our ISAC, just as Denise said, as there are to others. And I would encourage you to either go to the National Council of ISAC site or to our site to see more about us, but to see more about ISACs in general. I love what Scott said when you asked the initial question about critical infrastructure, and Scott alluded to not only national security, but also national economic security. And I think that ISACs are that sort of balancing act, right? Because national economic security, I think there are 3 elements, to national security. There's the security of the nation from a defense perspective. There's the security of the nation from an economic perspective. And also, I think that there is the security of the nation and that perception of security and confidence in the systems and capabilities and infrastructure of our nation. And I think ISACs have to focus on all 3 of those uniquely. And be a partner of government, be a partner of industry, and also be of high value to the consumer, the citizen. And I think bearing that in mind, that defines that uniqueness that Denise is talking about for each of our sectors of industry.
Well, that's just terrific, Carlos. And Faye, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, appreciate that. Again, any information, please don't hesitate to contact us via our website.
Okay, Scott, you have the last word.
Awesome, thank you. So firstly, I want to thank you, Gary, for giving us the opportunity of organizing the panel. I also want to just note for the IT ISAC, although we are the Information Technology ISAC, we also support into the food and agriculture industry. We have several member companies from the food and agriculture industry, because they don't, we provide them a forum a private forum for them to share about threats that they're seeing. And we also support the elections industry. So with the voting systems manufacturers, the companies who make the voting machines, they're also members of ours. So we spoke about the diversity and size of membership in member companies that are represented in some of the ISACs. We also are really fortunate that we have a diversity of multiple sectors within multiple critical infrastructure sectors that are represented within the IT ISAC. I don't have any breaking news on any events that we'll be having. There's a couple in the planning stages, virtual events, of course. We have a very active LinkedIn and Twitter account, so itisac.org on the website, and people can follow us at on Twitter or on LinkedIn at IT ISAC.
Well, on behalf of a grateful nation, thanks so much to what you and all of your team members do to keep us safe online, at work, and home, and play. And words cannot adequately express my gratitude for what you've done here today, but I'll try. Thank you. If you would like to be a guest on our show, just send an email to Gary@cyberheroescomics.com. Stay safe and be well.
All right, up next in our Something Old section, we have Rob Hirschfeld of Racken, his discussion at the recent DevOps experience titled, Nope, That's Not Infrastructure as Code. Great conversation. Let's give it a listen.
Hello, my name is Rob Hirschfeld, and we're going to talk about infrastructure as code, or completely automating your system so the robots can take over. And this all started with a Twitter war that I had about what is infrastructure as code. And the answer came back very simply as it's YAML. And so from that context, my presentation is over and you can stop. But some of you might be interested in a little bit more nuanced definition of infrastructure as code. And we're going to dive into that because it really is an important thing to understand, right? IAC, infrastructure as code, promises completely automated infrastructure. And the vendors are making it look super easy and nice, but the reality is that it's a really hard, complex challenge with a lot of moving parts. And so it's important to understand what's going on. Racken has infrastructure as code buried deep in our product. We don't think of ourselves as an infrastructure as code vendor. And this presentation is about our story of using infrastructure as code to solve data center automation problems. And it's core to what we do. And it's been essential for us to build something so that automation was portable, site to site, customer to customer, hardware type to hardware type, and not snowflaked out. And that's really what infrastructure as code is about. A lot of people approach it as a development question. So from the infrastructure as code development stack down, they start at the app and they move down and they assume infrastructure does a lot of lift for them. What Racken has done and why we have a really unique perspective about this that I'm going to share is that we really start from the infrastructure and work our way up. And so we drive upwards towards platform as a service. For us, that means digital rebar. A lot of people know Terraform. It's an incredibly popular infrastructure as code platform. And I'm going to compare and contrast them a little bit as I talk through what it takes to build real infrastructure as code solutions. So what we see is that there are 6 really pieces. So the first one is YAML, and that's where you would expect to start. It's sort of where the Twitter war started, and it's way too easy of an answer. You also need some type of dynamic infrastructure, a cloud, an infrastructure of service like VMware, Kubernetes, something dynamic that actually provides resources for you. From there, you also need to have a desired state engine. So you have to be able to have some type of way to say, this is what do I want to achieve. Now you've described it, you have infrastructure. That aspect is very important, right? Kubernetes does this really well, sort of the defining piece of Kubernetes. Digital rebar does it. Terraform, when you create a plan, does it. That's the concept here. And critically, you need to be able to deploy from source control. A lot of people, when they think of infrastructure as code, they think about GitOps, Docker files, things like that. That is very much a part of it, but it's not the only part of it. You also have to have composable automation. And we'll explain why it's important to have modular building blocks and not just see this as I wrote a bash script or I have a linear set of code and I just make things go. That isn't accomplishing what we think of as code and development and reusability and modules. And then finally, you need a CI/CD pipeline. So all of these things stack together in a very coherent way. And you can't do one without doing the other from an infrastructure as code perspective. They all become part of this hierarchy of needs to build infrastructure as code. If you look at Terraform, Terraform has been doing a lot of work in this space. They have a lot of these pieces. They don't do dynamic infrastructure. That's what you bring. It's actually designed to program dynamic infrastructure. And lately, they've been adding some desired state capabilities in their TF Cloud, the enterprise or team versions, which I don't consider Terraform. I consider that a add-on product. It's a new thing, using Terraform as the flagship and the brand, which I think makes sense for HashiCorp. And then, that builds you into a Terraform piece. I'm going to be focusing on what I know best, which is digital rebar, where we've built a lot of these pieces up from an infrastructure perspective. So how we actually build and provision and automate. And then when we get to dynamic infrastructure, we program Metal and run Metal automation. And then we use Terraform and Ansible and tools like that to provide interfaces into the other infrastructure automation pieces. And that's exactly the way you want to do it. Part of infrastructure as code is modular. You don't want to reinvent things that are already working. So is infrastructure as code the right term then, with all these bits and pieces and things that have to come together? It really isn't. It's the term we're using for this broad thing, but it's not a complete term. You might think software-defined infrastructure, SDX, or software-defined data center might make a lot more sense. But those have really been co-opted for infrastructure as a service. What we're really talking about is this concept of a continuously integrated data center, right? That CI/CD component at the top trickles all the way down and influences how you build things at the foundation. And so we believe that a continuously integrated data center is the right concept to pull together all of these infrastructure as code ideas and build out. So what I want to do is walk you through how we think of building a continuously integrated data center. And this is presented with Rackend's thinking in part. This is what we know best, is how we've built this. And it's part of our story. So I hope this makes sense to you, and you can take from this very generic lessons, because that's how we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to present it. So what we're going to do is really simply break down each one of those layers of the pyramid and give you concrete examples of things that we've had to do that accomplished infrastructure as code for us as we built up towards this whole stack. And the first one is programmatic configuration. For us, that meant Golang templates. You could use any number of different ways to accomplish this, but it meant that our configurations weren't just, here is a list of things that we know about the system, but we actually could pull data in and state in from other parts. And this to me is absolutely critical. If you're just saving, here's an inventory list of everything I have in my system, that's static, it's going to fall apart, it's hard to build modular pieces around it. And so when we look at programmatic configuration, it's very important that each piece of configuration can pull in data from the broader system around it, or from automation that comes before it, something that we've been calling automation chaining as a very important concept and sort of core to the continuously integrated data center. In this example, you can see we actually have ability to have built-in variables, we have conditional logic, we have simple substitution and ways to build that component together. The next thing that we have that's really important is this dynamic infrastructure idea. And dynamic infrastructure implies state. Somebody is building infrastructure, you ask for it, you get it back, you modify it, changes state. That's a really important component for this. And what we've done in the way we look at this is you have to have that state system. That state system has to have a distributed agent framework so that you can pull in information from other places. We call that machines and agents. And we've been extending this concept with some really interesting ideas of agents that can move about in your environment, super fun type of stuff, because you have to have an actor. Right, so the actor acts, the state is reflected, and then you have other ways to consume that state. So through a UX, which is really nice for humans, but a CLI and an API make it incredibly accessible. And that's the core of what the platform does. To us, if you're looking at a continuously integrated data center and you don't have a good story about state, then you're really going to be siloed. And that does not create an end-to-end automated system. From there, and this is exactly what this is describing. So operational systems downstream need to hook into it. Different clients need to be used, right? You should be able to address your infrastructure in many different ways, which is exactly what clouds give you. And that's an important part of how clouds actually provide value, is by having that consistent, accessible API. Just something you want in your data center, in the cloud, on the edge, wherever you're building infrastructure. Consistent, accessible APIs are absolutely essential. From there, we can start building things that start driving us into our target goals, our desired state. So the goal here is not to be able to programmatically build it. You do want to programmatically build up a system, but you don't want to have to ask over and over and over for that. You want something to do it for you. And this is what desired state is about. So instead of saying, I want you to add a disk, I want you to add a name, I want you to, all those tasks as individuals, you want to say, build me a system that looks like this. And the system needs to it out. Kubernetes is a great example of that. You provide a YAML file that has your system configuration, and it does all the dragging containers and wiring them together and starting them. That's desired state goal. So if you write a Terraform plan, that plan, when it's processed, gives you a final infrastructure state. Digital Rebar does the exact same thing. You ask for a target state, what we would call a workflow, and then the system coordinates, it builds a list of operations it needs to get done and then coordinates those tasks to get done. Desired state is really important to make all this stuff happen. And looks like a lot is going on because a lot is going on. Desired state is not simple. It's not just a bash file that I run and then makes things happen. It actually includes creating data, consuming data, updating other systems as you go. And so when you think about achieving a desired state, you're actually building that state as you go, informing it, using things that you've discovered about that to then inform future steps. There's a lot of discovery in the process of building a desired state system because a lot of decisions don't get made until you actually begin the process of building that target state. So once you have this idea that I can have all the systems achieving the state I want, the next thing I need to be able to do is do this in a composable way. And that's absolutely critical in how everything works together. Because as infrastructure as code implies, it's not just that I've written it down or configured it and stored it in Git, all those are important, but it's actually that I can reuse components, right? Most of the things that people do in infrastructure, especially in our world, aren't unique or specialized. They don't create value for your company by being a better BIOS installer. And yet in the industry, we haven't been able to make that modular and composable. So the goal of infrastructure as code is that you can reuse the pieces and parts that you have. So for example, as you go through the process, you might have things that set up a disk and inventory the system and update the BIOS and install Weasel as the VMware NetBoot installer and then configure the networking. All of those things are standard components. They're not unique business to business. Sometimes the sequences or the configuration details are, but not the modules. And so it's very important when you look at infrastructure as code, you do it in a way that allows you to reuse each of those pieces and parts so that individuals aren't making those decisions, but standard libraries are, just like you would be doing with code. And then that allows you to then take that and break your content and your catalog into meaningful parts. You might have completely standard operational process that brings up your infrastructure and then specialized content that configures it into a specific operational pattern or use. So the more you can do this, the more faster benefits that you're going to get out of that automation because you're going to be doing less and less custom automation, more and more standard automation. It's exactly like programming. And infrastructure as code should feel a little bit or a lot like programming, right? Infrastructure as code. So from there, we start getting into something that's really important, which is being able to deploy from source. So I have standard content, I have standard content packs, and they're modular. That means I can start getting composable parts from source code infrastructure and deploying it on an ongoing basis. It's exactly what we propose. It's what it's part of the discipline of using our product that we find really helps people accelerate their operational experience the most. And this is something in your IAC journey you really need to make sure that you understand from the very beginning. These composable parts actually get bundled into units. Those units become what we call content packs. Those content packs are immutable when they're in the system. So if you need to change them, you actually go through a full change control process. And then they're versioned and stamped, and we know exactly what is installed in every site because it's created from these immutable components. And we've been very careful in the code to make sure that those content packs are immutable and reliable. So those go into a catalog. That catalog then becomes available. And so this is a classic continuously integrated data center scenario where you have dev environments working a process, testing a process, publishing that content, and then making it available for wider dissemination into production, multiple customers, multiple sites. This creates robust and resilient DevOps processes. And then from there, you can hook all of that into a pipeline. pipeline is really important because what we really want to be able to do is have consistent, repeatable results that happen quickly in very small increments. And that's exactly the type of operational work going on here. As a matter of fact, what we've done in our last version is we fully enabled a pooling capability so that you can treat machines as elastic resources even when they're in hybrid or multi-cloud scenarios. And that means that your CI pipeline can say, I need to run a test against a cluster or a batch of machines. It can request those machines, take those actions, and then release those machines in a very cloud-like way. That's important because your CI pipeline needs fresh reset environments, which is really a core component of how we look at infrastructure as code in general. Wow. That's a lot of information, and I've been moving very quickly through it. So let me recap briefly on what we're talking about. What we're looking at here is a stack of technologies that fit together, which is really a stack of disciplines and components working from a programmatic configuration, or YAML, up through dynamic infrastructure and being able to set and reset, train and retrain on this infrastructure, right? Repetition is a critical component of being able to make sure that you've built good automation. If you're not confident that your automation can be reset and restarted, then it really isn't automation, right? It's a helpful script, and I don't consider that to be the same thing. You have to have a desired state engine so that you're not trying to incrementally describe your system, but you can give it the final state. You need to be able to deploy from source code so that any of that work does not involve humans making decisions along the way, but actually verified articles, something we call immutability, and a very important concept. I talk a whole hour, I have talked whole hours on just immutability as a concept. And you can't just do this as a big block of spaghetti code. It needs to be modular so that you can look at small pieces and do work in small units, and that allows you to put all of it into a continuously integrated data center. So how do we get there? This is a whole nother talk, and I want to just give you a little bit of sense on it, right? We've been very technical about how all these bits and pieces fit together, but it's not just about the technology. There's organizational components and thoughts that you have to do as you design good infrastructure as code environments, right? You have to think about the operations and the platform. This is that continuously repeatable component that I was talking about, where you need to know that when you push the button to rebuild your environment, that it's going to work and it's going to do what you expect it to do. So those are very important components here. And the technology has to work in a systems way. What we're talking about here is not, Terraform, get me a machine and then use Ansible to then connect to the machine and then another tool and another tool and another tool. Those tools, we still use them, but you have to look at them as connected and integrated together. And when all that works, you have to know that it's happening. So think about how this grid works. Think about how you're chaining your automation together and how you're building a real system. This is a good foundation to start your infrastructure as code practice. Thank you. I hope this presentation was helpful. If you're interested in more, please check out RackN and Digital Rebar and how we've approached infrastructure as code. Even if the tool isn't the right one for you, our strategies and our thought processes behind building resilient, reliable automation at scale is exactly the type of thing that might help guide you on your own infrastructure as code journey. Thank you.
Hiring great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? RecruitOps is the new way to source engineering talent. From MediaOps, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
All right, up next we've got Rob Hirschfeld from RackN from the recent DevOps experience. His presentation called Nope, That's Not Infrastructure as Code. A great presentation, so let's give it a listen. Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. Nope, that's wrong. Happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here with the Thursday edition of the news headlines. We start off today with a really interesting article on DevOps.com about developer tools for emerging technologies. I'm talking about software development for IoT, edge computing, and autonomous vehicles, for example. The article notes that software is being used in a multitude of ways to solve some of the world's most pressing challenges, but for some of the more advanced or newer technologies, developer tooling is just not as prevalent. The market for tools that monitor and test web and mobile applications is healthy and diverse, but tooling for IoT/edge, 5G, and autonomous vehicles has yet to see the same surge. And as projects become more complex, how do you keep up with automated and manual testing? How do you ensure that firmware updates don't brick devices out in the field? Fixing a bug in a website can be deployed in a few minutes, and in some cases customers won't even notice. But shipping new versions of software to devices is a little more tricky. This article takes a look at the areas where tooling must be updated if innovation in these emerging areas is going to keep pace with the market. We also have an article that looks at XDR in the DevOps space for achieving DevSecOps. XDR stands for Extended Detection and Response and represents the next generation of security as organizations transition from EDR, Endpoint Detection and Response, and SIEM, Security Information and Event Management technologies. XDR can detect threats quickly by automatically collecting and combining information from across an IT environment to security analysts and to give security analysts the context they need for fast investigation and response. It is also a new organizational model that will help security teams work more closely together, focusing on the threats rather than on specific tools or IT systems. This ties into a broader movement in security organizations to transition to DevSecOps models, helping developers, security, and operations shift security left and integrate security into all parts of the development lifecycle. In news, Split has integrated its namesake platform for managing feature flagging with Amazon's Simple Storage service as part of an effort to streamline the process of adding new capabilities to applications. Feature flagging is a great way for organizations to understand how new features impact the user experience and be able to roll back and make changes as necessary. However, one of the most challenging aspects of feature flagging is providing a way for development teams to access the data required. By integrating with Amazon S3, the Split platform will be able to ingest millions of customer events per minute as Parquet files. That capability will make it possible to have enough statistically relevant data to analyze how a feature flag is being employed within minutes. Feature flagging is part of the larger topic of change management and is being embraced by more organizations as they undergo their digital transformations. The Split technology is making it easier for DevOps teams and application owners to collaborate on the rollout of features based on feedback from end users, regardless of what DevOps platforms application development teams are using. Over on Container Journal, we have the results of a survey recently conducted by Hammerspace that shows organizations are struggling with deploying stateful applications on Kubernetes clusters. Issues around the time and effort required to get the apps up and running are experienced by a majority of respondents, as a lack of automation and the complexity of data orchestration are roadblocks. For those of you playing at home, stateful applications are those that save information about each client session and uses that information the next time the client makes a request, such as with banking apps, for example. Stateless apps basically wipe the slate clean every time a session ends. However, the data that is collected with stateless apps is often stored somewhere outside the Kubernetes cluster, which can be complex and expensive to manage. IT teams want to reduce that complexity by keeping the data within the Kubernetes cluster, hence the need for stateful apps. Hammerspace is making a case for a software-defined approach that unifies the management of data and storage on a Kubernetes cluster, which would reduce both cost and complexity. The space is still very much evolving, but as stateful container applications are increasingly deployed in production environments, IT organizations must reconcile the need to finally unify storage and data management. All right, over on Security Boulevard, we have an article that looks at a recent case involving insider theft of IP, intellectual property, from Italian defense contractor Leonardo. According to police, a series of attacks occurred within the Leonardo ecosystem between 2015 and 2017. And those attacks were carried out by two insiders who were targeting the aerostructure and aircraft divisions. The article describes how they stole the IP, using USB keys and uploading the data to a third-party website. And it highlights the very real issue of insider threats. We've highlighted the need for organizations to keep an eye out now for potential insider threats, especially now during the pandemic, when entire workforces are largely remote. The fact that the thefts in this case occurred between 3 and 5 years ago shows just how stealth such acts can be. Therefore, it is up to each company to remain vigilant and watch for any inconsistent activity with its employees and its data. Finally, we take another look at XDR, but this is from another lens. You may remember from like 5 minutes ago, I told you about the article on DevOps.com about XDR and its role in DevSecOps. Well, now we have an article here on Security Boulevard that implores organizations to perhaps not be so quick to adopt XDR. XDR offers benefits to those looking to improve their security posture, but there are drawbacks to a singular platform approach. For one, a platform approach often means many technologies that aren't as robust as single solutions from vendors that specialize in that technology. You've heard the expression jack of all trades and master of none? Well, that's the issue with XDR technology. At least that's what the author of this article says. It's better to go best of breed, he says, and build a solution that addresses your organization's unique needs. However, there are plenty of organizations that just don't have the budget or manpower to deal with the time and effort required to manage multiple point solutions. If that is the case, I wouldn't turn a blind eye to XDR technology. All right, that is all that I have for today's edition of the news headlines. Check back on Monday when I'll have a fresh batch for you. Until then, have a great weekend and stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Chris Hickman, who is the Chief Security Officer at Keyfactor, which is a digital identity security vendor. Chris, thanks so much for taking a couple minutes and talking with me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me, Charlene.
So I know this has been kind of a crazy year for security, and so many organizations kind of rushing to get their employees set up in their work from home environments, and digital certificates. I would imagine has kind of come into play in some way, shape, or form there. But as we see kind of this rush to digital transformation as a result of COVID-19, and just everything that has to that accompanies that, especially we're talking about application development and newer, cloud native technologies such as containers and Kubernetes. I would imagine that, digital certificates are increasingly becoming a part of the conversation. So I'm interested in finding out from you kind of what you're hearing about in the digital certificate space, and what are maybe some of the trends that you're seeing there?
Yeah, so you're absolutely correct in your assumption. I mean, digital certificates continue to be used in new and creative ways, from securing containers, DevOps platforms. We see a tremendous uptake of use of certificates in securing connected devices, IoT type footprints, and more importantly, or equally importantly, perhaps in the traditional enterprise space. You're as well correct in saying, this rush to a remote workforce had a significant consequence for security in an organization and push the traditional boundaries. And a lot of organizations, very frankly, struggled to take their certificate footprint and push it out. So, we certainly did see organizations overnight needing to facilitate remote work and looking to leverage certificates to secure endpoints and to secure authenticate users and in a way that had not been done or a scale that had not been practiced before. And when you do that, certain things do tend to come up that you didn't anticipate. So interesting time, and for our customers, leveraging things like our platform to then be able to manage became a really big win for them during an otherwise difficult time.
Excellent. Well, you mentioned the fact that maybe they're being used in ways that and encountering issues that perhaps they've never seen before. What are some examples that you might be able to provide to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I always tend to fall back to in having this conversation is, the data has moved from within our four walls to cloud-based systems and so on and so forth, and a lot of legacy security products and a lot of legacy PKI, for that matter, was never really designed to exist outside of the organization. So, when organizations are saying, let's leverage digital transformation and move to the cloud, one of the things that's starting to trip them up is, well, yeah, but we can't issue certs out there, or we can't manage the certs that we issue out there. So we're increasingly sort of seeing conventional boundaries being pushed, and as a result, organizations struggling to keep on top of where their certs are, even how their PKI can extend, how many certs they have in the organization is so the foundational problem that many organizations have, and it's really they're almost stymied, if you will, from leveraging this technology in the ways that they need to. So the problem sort of becomes compounded where they'll stand up something else, and now you've got two things to manage where rebuilding the first thing correctly would have actually, in a lot of cases, been a better result to meet your use cases and your needs.
So what about technologies such as the cloud native technologies, containers, Kubernetes, service meshes, all those? Where do they fit into the digital certificate equation and the conversation, if you will?
Yeah, there's two predominant areas. The first one is one of securing a container and authenticating the container. The second one is signing code. So we tend to lose track of the fact that code signing is actually a very common application that digital certificates are leveraged for. So those are the more common ones that we see. And what we're starting to see tangential evidence of is, there's an article that I read earlier this week about malware getting into containers that are being dispersed and things of the sort. We're starting to question, hey, are there things like private keys ending up in containers that shouldn't, by virtue of people just not understanding how to do PKI and leverage these certificates correctly? While we've seen no evidence of that, it certainly is interesting to look at it and start to evaluate where are my keys in my organization? Where do they actually live? And more importantly, things like code signing keys, who are they being used by and for what purpose? So,
you mentioned the malware showing up in container images, and that's something that we've covered quite a bit on Container Journal. But I imagine that the malware issue is prevalent even beyond containers, and digital certificates are kind of not immune to that, if you will, especially when we're talking about like cryptojacking or crypto exploits. So where are we in when we're talking about digital certificates? Where does that kind of fit into that conversation as well? I mean, is crypto exploits, is that becoming a larger issue that digital certificates are maybe addressing, or actually being kind of a victim to or a victim of?
Absolutely. There's really two areas of digital certificates that are impacted there. The first one is pairs of certificates, both private key and public key, for securing SSL and things of the sort. And then the second one being the use of code signing keys that have been stolen. And certainly as it pertains to the malware and even ransomware areas for anything, those are very common assets that are used and sold and trade hands for putting malware to getting past the verification of the signature for that software. So it looks legitimate. We also see it a lot in IoT devices. So IoT devices suffer a fair bit from not checking the signatures of firmware updates and things of the sort. So it is possible to hijack a device by embedding or injecting firmware onto it that the signatures are never actually checked on. Therefore, the device thinks it's valid.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let's talk about something good with digital certificates. What are you seeing kind of happening in the digital certificate space moving forward, especially as, kind of understanding that we are living in this new remote work environment, and, environments are so different than they were, say, even this time last year.
Yeah, I think interestingly enough, what's really neat is that people have challenged their traditional assumptions. I mean, PKI is not new. Let's not fool ourselves. It's been around for a long period of time, but it's a good technology. It's sustained time, which is very hard for technology to do. And as a result, people are now looking at things that they built a few years ago and asking the question, is this really what is going to take me forward, take my organization forward? And in a lot of cases, they're getting an answer that's yes, but. So there's a lot of really good deployments out there, and people know how to leverage them, but they are starting to push the boundaries. And I'm always amazed at the creative ways in which people are starting and continue to leverage things like digital certificates. We see, if we look at things like automotive as an example, next generation of cars are all going to have certs. Every component is going to have certs. It's going to be, every car is basically a computer on wheels now versus a mechanical device. And we look at how healthcare has been impacted, and people really pushing the boundaries of remote care. And of course, we know what happened with telemedicine when the pandemic arrived. And if you think about certs, it enables all of that goodness to happen in the innovation to make sure things are secure without having to reinvent security. And I think more and more we're going to find creative ways to apply digital certificates into our products, into our environments, into our day-to-day lives. And therefore, I can't say I know what necessarily lies ahead of us, but whatever it is, I'm sure it will push the boundaries in creative ways to make sure that devices, people, and places stay secure.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that digital certificates are far from seeing the end of their lives. So, Chris, thank you very much for walking me through this. Really, really fascinating to kind of think about, the impact of the past year on the way things are being built and the role of digital certificates in it, for better or for worse. So, thank you again. Really, really do appreciate your time and your expertise.
It's my pleasure, and thanks again for inviting me.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Thursday edition of the Webinars Preview. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. We have so many amazing webinars that are coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. We have a couple to close out 2020 and one for you in today's preview for 2021. I love saying that. That means we're beyond 2020. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The first one is happening tomorrow, December 18th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. And it is the latest in the series of DevOps Unbound Roundtable series. It's called Day 2 DevOps. It focuses on that time period after DevOps has been adopted successfully by smaller teams and then kind of filters out into the organization for wide-scale adoption. But what comes next after that? So this is an all-star panel of 6 that's being hosted by Alan Schimmel, and they're going to delve into topics such as how do we successfully adopt DevOps across teams and with diverse technologies, tools, and applications. How does DevOps embrace SRE, ITSM, DataOps, and IOps, plus chaos engineering to achieve our larger goals? How is DevOps contributing value to our digital transformation? And what unique challenges will surface, and how can we proactively plan for success? Definitely a webinar worth checking out if you've got the time. The second webinar is happening Monday, December 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is called 6 AppSec Lessons from the SolarWinds and FireEye Breach, and it is sponsored by SciCode. Now, you're probably aware that SolarWinds infrastructure was breached, and subsequently, security company FireEye was also breached. It's a supply chain attack, and that resulted in a compromise of the U.S. Treasury Department and Department of Commerce at the hands of what is believed to be a Russian hacking group. So although the details of the breach are still pretty murky, several lessons have emerged. So this webinar will focus on the top 6 application security learnings from the SolarWinds incident, and will provide concrete steps that every organization can take to ensure the integrity of releases and development infrastructure. Okay, beyond Monday's webinar, we are taking a short break for the holidays. But when we return in January, we will start fresh with some excellent topics, including the first one, which is happening Thursday, January 7th. It's called Modernizing Jenkins CI/CD Pipelines. It's happening at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It's sponsored by Harness. Jenkins has become the de facto standard for continuous integration over the past decade or so. But as teams modernize their applications and migrate to the cloud and microservices, the ability to scale Jenkins for CI/CD becomes ever more challenging. So we are going to, in this webinar, take a look at how Jenkins CI integrated with Harness CD can modernize CI/CD pipelines. Among some of the key takeaways, the fact that CI and CD are 2 different worlds that can be seamlessly integrated. The reuse of Jenkins jobs and scripts is possible with today's leading CD solutions. And cloud-native CI/CD technologies pipelines can be built in minutes and can empower engineers to deploy on demand at any time. So total CI/CD goodness with that webinar. All right, guys, that is all that I have for today's webinar preview. Please tune in on Monday. I'll have some more webinars for you to mark your calendar for. Until then, have a great weekend and stay safe. All right, up next we have a conversation between Mitch Ashley of ASG and Richard Steinen, who's an author and chief research analyst at IT Harvest. They talk about the recent SolarWinds data breach and some of the implications thereof, especially for organizations that are using SolarWinds implementations. So without further ado, let's give this one a really good listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, I'm excited to be joined by a colleague, someone that I've known for a while in the security industry, Richard Steinen, who's a chief research analyst with IT Harvest, author, of course, and longtime analyst from back to the Gartner days, and written a lot about that. So good to be talking with you, Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Great to be here.
I reached out to talk with you because I saw your interview on Al Jazeera about the federal government hacks, FireEye, and SolarWinds and all that was happening. And I know you're following along pretty closely and in touch with different folks about what's happening. Now we're talking on Monday about early afternoon, late morning, my time. So things are developing fast. Maybe could you just set some context for us? Tell us about what was announced in terms of the hack and kind of what we know so far.
Sure. Well, first of all, we knew of a hack against FireEye last week, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody was talking about that. And actually, most of the industry was pretty pleased with FireEye's disclosure and what they follow on did, right? So
they're pretty transparent, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, all of their attack tools that they use for red teaming were stolen. So they issued IOCs for all their own attack tools, which is pretty cool and the right thing to do, and shows how they're on just the cutting edge of this battle, right? So they know what they had to do. And then a Reuters Sunday about 5:30 just issued the guy got it out as fast as he could. I think it's Chris Bing. Just a couple liner that Commerce and Division of Commerce that handles our telecom regulations and the Treasury Department had been breached by sophisticated attackers. And then right after that, Al Jazeera reached out to me. But meanwhile, we're following the news. It's just piles on. As I think it was.
My phone was going nuts. Something's going on. You knew
on a Sunday. Ellen Nakashima pulled together and was the first to indicate that it was the same attack scenario as FireEye suffered. Mm-hmm. And then she updated her article to say it was a breach of SolarWinds that led to all of this. That's, then I got on air right after that. So we had all that information about an hour after the first release. But easily the most important aspect of all this is that it was a supply chain attack, that the attackers breached SolarWinds and compromised their update servers, way in the spring of 2020. In other words, they've had, a good 6 months to basically attack any customer of SolarWinds, which is pretty amazing because you dig into it. Now, SolarWinds is a network management tool, right? It checks NetFlow, can update, network gear and all that stuff. It has wide permissions inside an organization. And it's, because it's looking at NetFlow and all the rest, it's a security tool, right? It would be one of the primary tools you use to detect if you're breached. But most of the customers could be breached. I think it was Dmitry Apolovich who was saying, this is a really good thing that the attackers are, a small team. They can't breach everybody. They had to pick their targets. Of course, the bad thing is they had plenty of targets to pick from. For a while this was going on, SolarWinds still had a page about their customers. They claimed 425 out of the Fortune 500 as customers, every branch of the military, the Pentagon, and the Office of the President. So, which is a 3,000 person organization, right? It's the executive branch. So obviously it was a target-rich environment for the attackers. And FireEye is attributing this to Kazee Bear, which is APT 29, which is of course a part of the SRB, which is the agency inside Russia that is tasked with doing espionage. So it's what I found interesting. A journalist from Newsweek was asking me, is this the same MO as other Russian attacks? And you got to go, well, it's a little more nuanced than that because each of the divisions of Russian teams have different MOs, different things they're trying to do. So GRU is most associated with Sandworm that, took down the power grid in Ukraine and also launched NotPetya. And NotPetya has a similarity with the SolarWinds attack because NotPetya was initiated by a software update from a accounting package used mostly in the Ukraine. So all of a sudden, everybody in Ukraine got a worm that was spreading and destroying everything at once. And it turned.
I don't remember a network monitoring, security monitoring system being this part of an attack that's something this big. Is it?
No, I don't. I bet it's happened in the past, but we just didn't know about it.
Didn't know about it. Yeah.
Right.
I don't recall of anything like this, but what a great attack vector for the attacker.
I know. And it's so sophisticated. And even after they execute the attack, instead of, creating compromised credentials or using their own credentials, they used internal credentials they probably got with a Mimikatz kind of attack to spread laterally. So they, even after penetrating, getting initial foothold, they hid their evidence of them being there. They would, modify DLLs and then use them and then change them back to the original. So you wouldn't be able to scan to see if you were infected. So definitely not a attempt at a loud disruptive attack that NotPetya obviously was. This was pure espionage, steal the good stuff and stay persistent as long as you can, which makes it pretty easy to predict. So we're talking on Monday. This week, we're going to learn of a lot of Me Too's, and if you are going to reveal that you've been breached, it's good to be one of a crowd, right? Then it doesn't look
it's a little
as bad.
safer now. Now you're not standing out alone and getting all the attention.
Right.
That wave, the wave's already hit the beach. Right?
Yeah. Now the trouble is that I am not very confident of most federal agencies to even be able to, even using what they have now, to be able to discover if they've been part of this breach, right? Because we've got IOCs, we've got hashes of elements of the attack. We know, the vector that came in, so you could check your updates from SolarWinds. If you've updated anything from SolarWinds since March, you have vulnerable SolarWinds installations, right? One researcher found a published CVE for SolarWinds vulnerabilities that were outrageously bad, right? It's like anybody could get access to anything. And this was way less in March. And there's some question as whether that was even part of this. It was just a separate thing, right? So yeah, you would have had to update since then. And obviously SolarWinds has, a new update, if you can trust it, to push out. Microsoft's published signatures for Microsoft Defender. So, there's a lot of good stuff going on, but, most of the federal government doesn't even have Microsoft System Center, right? They can't push out updates and they can't re-image machines when they're dirty, right? That's why all of the US military is still on Windows XP. So they don't have any of that capability either. So it'll be a very interesting end of the year for all of us tracking what's going on here.
It was like a lot of contractors getting hired to come in and both determine what's going on and fix it, right?
Yeah.
And fix it yourself. That's usually what happens.
One thing I think is how I read the story is that it's FireEye who discovered the breach at Commerce and Treasury, and it's FireEye's report, which is fabulous. I think it's going to go down in history as important as the APT1 report that FireEye Mandiant published in 2008 or something. But they're talking, they allude to the fact that many federal agencies were subject to the attack. So I'm sure that through FireEye and they're working with a lot of those agencies right now, and we'll learn, throughout the rest of the year about the other breaches, and the repercussions will go on for a decade after this.
Well, to me, it's easy to read things into all of this because we don't have a lot of information right now. Right. So let me do that.
Yeah,
it's interesting that it's commerce. It was actually particularly the NTIA, which is the telecom branch, if you will. Right. So you think about our telecommunication systems with what they're infiltrating. And of course, a lot more we're finding out too. So it wasn't that they, like any smart hacker, or, they don't go after the crown jewels right away, but they go after some really valuable things. And you think, we always want to move laterally and grab the directory. Well, you know what? If I can sit there and collect intelligence, which is what those organizations are about, not just, financial gain.
Right.
It's just scary, the untold information that might have and probably did escape. It's gone. It's out there.
Yeah, you don't go after the crown jewels because they're going to be, mined, and people will discover you if you go after the nuclear launch codes, to use the classic example. And especially a spy agency, right? They learn so much from traditional signals intelligence where they may not even be able to tell what's being said. They can just tell that something is being said at a certain time between two parties. That's extremely valuable. And, Treasury imposes financial sanctions on Russia and are used for that purpose. So just having foreknowledge of those things coming down the wire would be good for the attackers. I'm not sure if a telecom regulator, will have rich information that's usable. And don't forget, these are government agencies. They are required to be public about what they do. So now damaging material, internal emails, which evidently both these organizations and FireEye had their emails being read all the time, that could lead to some compromise, that would be embarrassing. And maybe luckily it's embarrassing to this month's administration, not necessarily after January 20th, right? Where they'll be able to say, oh, that was them, not us. We'll fix this.
I think one of the things too, if you take some of the other attacks, like using email as a vector to compromise, invoicing with customers or other kinds of interactions, not just what's being said, those are potentially vulnerable too, not necessarily invoicing, but you think of the what's going on that they now have intelligence to and can, get in the middle of, and suddenly they're participating in something that the government doesn't know about, but the end telecom organization thinks it is, or some variation of that.
Right.
It's just kind of boggles the mind to think of where it could go, of course.
Yeah. And once again, it's we should be thankful that it was a espionage operation and not a destructive operation, right? Because they could have easily implanted the equivalent of ransomware everywhere and shut down the operations of federal agencies. That would not be a good thing.
Are we attributing too much to Russia and their efforts here to say, oh, the whole Russia thing with the president and the election in 2016 sort of got all of our attention, and Chris Gradz and others on what's happening in the election system, and sort of forget about everything else? And not that we did, but it certainly takes many people's eye off those balls and onto the shiny thing that's in the news lately. Do you think it was that intentional, possibly, that let's go here, that'll get them busy, and then let's go after this, and who knows what the next thing is they're going to attack?
Yeah, if you go down the spycraft rabbit hole, you always have to start thinking of all those interplays, right? Are they playing? Are they playing checkers, or are they playing three-dimensional chess kind of thing? I am naive. I always approach things fairly naively. So I like to look at cause and effect in the simplest explanation for things. And it's, the task of a spy agency to collect intelligence. and they are literally tasked by the policymakers. This would be Putin and his henchmen. And I can imagine that there are multiple tasks, right? GRU, FSB, and SRB all have different tasks. So they're and in the hacking world, we always have targets of opportunity, right? We attack just because somebody's open to an attack. And in this case, they got practically every federal agency and all the branches of the military. So the opportunities are there, and whether or not they can spin up big enough teams to, do the careful reconnaissance and infiltration and then lateral movement and exfiltration in the 6 months they had is, to me, is a big question. We know the two.
That analysis could be going on for the next 3 or 5 years too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Necessarily just what can you take advantage of now. It is that, but there's a lot of data to be mined, obviously.
Yep. So the other point I'm been trying to make on Twitter is, and even Chris Krebs cited CISA, his former team. They issued a warning, I think late last night, an emergency warning to federal agencies, and it was stop using SolarWinds right now. Shut it off. Block all access. Turn it off. Uninstall it. And that is really, really bad advice. That is
not only are the cows outside of the barn, but that thing's been sitting empty for 6 months. Good luck.
Exactly. And you need that tool for finding the intruders, and it's probably the only tool they have for doing good net flow analysis and all the rest. They have to have that. Don't go shooting the tools. And that kind of advice, Chris Krebs said it was a bold move or something, and a strong move to do that. I think it's a very weak move. It tells me that, the people at CISA have about the level of understanding of IT operations that I did when I became a Gartner analyst. And at the time, there was a Solaris vulnerability. It was critical, gave remote access to anybody. And I issued a Gartner, fast take, get this out there immediately. Everybody should patch immediately. So then I started taking calls from CIOs, and they said, "You are an idiot. We have 2,000 Solaris servers, and we have to schedule each one to take it down, install patches, test them, and we have to do that, over a weekend or something. By the time we're done with 2,000 Solaris servers, there'll be another critical patch that we have to install." So I learned my lesson, but I think of it every time I see, one of these security experts on Twitter saying, "This is a serious one. You should all patch immediately." And if you think about it, I'm not a fan of having to patch, right? Unquestioned patching, right? It's like for 6 years, I managed not to update my iTunes. I just would, every time Apple told me to update my iTunes, I'd just say later. I did that for 6 years because iTunes was working. I didn't need to change the interface, whatever they wanted to do. And you suspect the vendor of, especially Apple, wanting to get more information from you. So an update is bound to be less secure.
I don't know what period that was, but you missed some bad updates.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a little hairy, but
exactly. Or, update your Flash immediately. It's like, I don't know. What should I trust Flash? And speaking of updates, so now we've got NotPetya is a great example. We've got SolarWinds, but don't forget the I think it was called Flame, which was an NSA exploit, and it was pushed via Microsoft update. So they would spoof Microsoft server, and then they would send a digitally signed with Microsoft cert update to their targets. And it was highly targeted, right? So super sophisticated. At the time, they estimated it would, in order to do that, they had to create a collision with an MD5 hash. And they estimated that would cost $200,000 of compute time to, it's very similar to creating a new Bitcoin. Same process to create an MD5 hash collision. And that at that time was the most sophisticated attack I'd ever seen. And obviously the Russian SRV is, got the playbooks that we use, and they're using them back.
What do you think? So if we kind of step away from the federal government for a moment, what are some of the takeaways you think we have, or maybe we'll have at the end of this whole process that would be useful for the business environment for organizations?
Yeah, we have to start considering that playoff that we were talking about between patches that you need because they're more secure, and obviously updates that you need because they introduce more functionality, and the potential that those could be backdoored. So we have to come up with a few more steps to ensure that level of trust. So certainly software providers should be rotating keys very, very often, every day, every hour. I don't care. A new key every time they issue an update. And then a secure way for people to check the validity of those signatures before they install something. And test environments. So mind you, this particular hack against SolarWinds stayed for 12 to 14 days before it triggered itself. And nobody's got a test for updates that's 12 to 14 days long, right? You're not going to let it just sit there for that much time. You want 2 hours maybe. But we do have to figure out how to solve that problem. That's a new vector, I guess, that we haven't thought about before.
It fits in the APTs, the slow rolling attacks. It's that same kind of, now you're talking about a different form of that, where it's already in that, but it's not, not detectable.
Right.
So at some point the Easter egg wakes up because it's Easter, right?
That's right. That's right. We know sleepers, we used to call them in the spy world, right? And a sleeper agent could be sitting there, and if you think about it, as I have been, maybe there are things embedded in real legacy stuff that we've never gone back and looked at, and they could be sitting there just waiting to be called on.
There's only two types of organizations: those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked.
That's right. That's right.
It's kind of way of the world you have to assume we're in, unfortunately. But it truly is that way. Well, thanks for spending some time catching up, and appreciate all your digging into this and keeping us informed on Twitter and other interviews that you're doing. So
absolutely,
I wish you the best. If something pops up, let me know.
Okay,
we'll do an update.
All right, good deal.
Okay,
thanks.
All right,
Mitch.
take care, Richard.
All right,
talk
bye.
to you again soon.
Next up, we've got a double dose of Mike Vizard. First up, he speaks with Mark Weiner, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Volterra. They talk about the path to cloud-native technologies and how organizations how far they really are on this path. So that's the first one. And then after that, he speaks with Trilio CEO David Safai about data protection in Kubernetes environments and how it really needs to run natively. So let's give both of these conversations a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Mark Weiner, who's the Chief Marketing Officer for Volterra. They are a maker of a hybrid cloud computing platform. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike.
You guys just put out a survey talking about what the level of Kubernetes adoption really is in the world. And I'm wondering, were you surprised by any of those results? And where are we? Because it seems like every time I turn around, somebody's talking about Kubernetes, but I wonder if it's one of those things where we talk about it a lot more than we do it.
That is well put. So we did the survey, over 300 professionals across North America, large enterprise, mid-size as well. Interesting, north of 80% of respondents are using or playing with using Kubernetes, but are they playing with it versus large scale production? It's really the former. Well less than half are not having it run the majority of their workloads or close. And the survey talked about some of the challenges or reasons why. A lot of people see the promise, but the reality is challenges like deploying it, operating it, certainly networking and security around it are a lot more difficult than a lot of the buzz out there talks about the upside.
One of the things that leapt out at me about this survey was you guys were talking about the number of APIs that people are dealing with. So where do you think we are in that transition? If every time I think about a microservices application now, how many APIs are in that and how many of these things do we need to think about managing?
Exactly. So previously, right, a few years ago, APIs, you had a couple, 2, 3, 1, whatever, it's outward facing, right? Other apps are going to plug into your monolithic app. Now we chop it up into jigsaw puzzle pieces. Guess what? These aren't communicating at the IP layer. All these microservices are using APIs to communicate with each other. So now you've just, say you've got 20 microservices, you've gone from 2 APIs to 20, you've gone up 10x. That's not all. A lot of these modern microservice-based apps have multiple clusters. You're having multiple workloads distributed, even if it's in the same cloud provider. So now all of a sudden, maybe you've got 5 or 10 clusters with, n number of microservices. You've got that 20 times another 5 or 10, that's 200. That's 100x of the number of APIs you may have had before. And the products you had to manage your APIs and API gateway were mainly for outbound facing as opposed to for security, discovery, and management. So guess what your workload, your personal DevOps workload just did?
And it's my perception too that all these microservices and APIs are running on different clouds, or will be. Some will be on premise, some will be on AWS and Azure. And that adds a lot of latency issues. Also, how do we stitch together different microservices that might make up some larger hybrid application someday? What's your sense of where are we on that part of the journey?
Totally. You bring up great points, and they're two different points. One challenge, going from a single cloud provider or single location, maybe it's on-prem, maybe it's outsourced cloud, to multiple clouds. There you got the tools to manage them both the same way or secure them. Challenge one. And then challenge two, you mentioned the latency, et cetera. You're not a monolithic app running in maybe a couple of few different geographic zones or multiple zones for HA. And how all of a sudden you distribute it out. How do you properly stitch it together, manage the latency, also manage the security? Because you're not going in and out of different locations, even if it's the same CSP, or like you said earlier, different CSPs. How do you secure all that properly as well? Both of those have impact on the app, on security, on performance, and all that lies with DevOps and or NetOps, depending on your org structure.
I feel like somewhere along the line, we promised IT people that things would get simpler or easier or better. And as I look at it now, things seem to be getting more complex than ever. So did we kind of lead people down the primrose path here? What's going on?
I think that's well put. I think for your pure developers at times, I got to crank out code faster and faster to my stakeholders. Maybe some of that has gotten a bit better. You got your libraries, your code, not just open source microservices. I can plug it in. Developers often, they still have more challenges, can crank out things. The state where the challenge and a lot of that burden's gotten dropped is on DevOps. On DevOps, now you've got to host the app, run the app, monitor the app. You often have security if it's in the modern app environment, as opposed to your traditional network and security teams in the infrastructure and ops group. So that's really landed with them. So DevOps has picked a lot of that up, and the impact is on the stakeholder. Your app may not be delivered any faster than it was before.
So Mark, is this some sort of Faustian bargain we've created where we're trying to make the lives of the developers easier, but that's at the expense of the IT operations team? And is that sustainable?
Great question. I think to some degree, you have made developers more, quote, agile. I don't know about easier, but they can crank out more and, appease their stakeholders, impact the business more. But all that burden, all this complexity, these microservices, distributed clusters, multi-cloud, that falls squarely on DevOps. Not even so much IT operations. In a modern, again, depending on what your structure, in a modern org, that often lands right on DevOps. That also has to help with development, but it lands on them. They got to figure all that out, all these angles. So in the end, the stakeholder, the business holder, may or may not get their time to service and get their business impact any faster. DevOps just has a lot more work, and they got to get resourced better.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that leapt out at me in the survey was who's driving this shift. It seems the survey points the finger towards the DevOps folks for sure, but it also suggested they were exercising a lot more control over networking and security, and that kind of surprised me. What's your take of what's happening in the transition within IT organizations about who's driving what?
Great question. And that's really great. As I speak a lot with, the analyst community, your Gartners, your IDCs, the others, it really is going to vary org by org and industry by industry, even by size. But as apps are getting, again, more modern, chopped up, there's more requirements within an app for networking and security versus from the app to the other infrastructure components and users. DevOps are picking up more of those things. Back in my day, like early days, application delivery controllers, ADCs, that was all owned by the network community. The stakeholder was the web app owner. Now, a lot of that function, the load balancing inside of an app, is owned by DevOps, not by INO. And so it's going to vary by org and that. But as apps, again, get more complex inside, DevOps is going to own more of those external networking, security, and other functions. But it's a journey that started and is going to continue for a bit as apps get modernized, because only a fraction of apps are microservice, container, and modern today. So that's definitely a work in progress. Maybe we're in the second inning. top of the second inning.
What's your sense of what's going on with service meshes? I look inside your platform, and at the core of it is a service mesh that helps me kind of manage all this and make all these connections. Clearly, there's been a lot of controversy around the subject of late with the open source community. What do you think is going on here, and how critical will service meshes prove to be?
Definitely, there's politics and game playing with open source versus proprietary and vendor. I think this journey as apps, as folks build out more clusters, again, one or more cloud providers, but just multiple clusters doing different hunks of a workload to build an integrated app, a microservice app, service mesh will become default component as apps continue to get built this way and scaled out. Which of the ways is going to win? That's certainly an area up for debate, which open source versus proprietary, there's benefits to each. So that's going to play out. But I think microservice will become a default component over the next 2.5 to 5 years, next 30 to 60 months, as more modern apps become more mainstream for things getting written and old apps get replaced. It'll just become a default component, like load balancers did to web apps, in the late 90s, not to show ourselves multiple generations, but that it's going to become a default component over time.
I feel like there's a progression here, maybe, and I could be wrong, but it seems like people start out using a proxy server or software of some type to deal with a handful of microservices. Then they graduate to an ingress controller, and then they get up into like the tens and maybe hundreds of microservices, and they're looking at a service mesh. And then once I make that leap, I kind of have to start figuring out how to manage this whole thing at another level of abstraction, because that service mesh is almost like this new layer of abstraction that's a complement to Kubernetes, right? And everything underneath that becomes something that I don't have to master all these lower level network underlay APIs. Do you think that people are making that journey yet? And where are we? And do people really appreciate the role service meshes are about to play?
I think they probably don't fully yet. And again, that's really at a true architecture level. I think, and we've seen that with a number of our customers, a graduated or gradual way to play that is really looking at it. How can you get the benefits of, and actually not just even an ingress, but an ingress-egress controller, an ADC, so to speak, what that was for a web app, doing this now for a Kubernetes and modern app, getting that done, but getting the benefit of a service mesh where you can manage across all these clusters, a lot of that functionality with this, this ingress-egress controller. You have, some web app security, a WAF in there. You can have API security in there with a modern one like ours. But again, control all these, control them all centrally, but fully distribute them without having to go to a full service mesh architecture, knowing you can then step up to do it. I think maybe a bit of a gradual play may work well for a lot of folks as they build their apps out versus binary. I'm going from tactical components all the way to a full architecture. There is some middle ground you can do, again, with a more integrated, fully functional, again, a modern ADC, so to speak, an integrated ingress-egress controller plus security, but you can centrally manage, see them eye to eye, see them end to end without having to build a full mesh up front. That might be a way. We've seen a number of our customers literally grow and step up and do that over the last year, 18 months.
Do you think as we go forward that people are actually going to see Kubernetes, or for that matter, the service mesh, because they're really designed to be platforms for building a platform? The end game is the management construct. So right. Are we all a little too far down in the weeds right now? And maybe we need to kind of come up a few notches and say, hey, what exactly is the end game here?
Yeah, I think, both at an infra level and end game, I think you have to look at it, in this case, stakeholder, at the app level. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to scale, get a hyperscale level app up? Are we trying to do this more geographically? Is it for compliance and we want to, run things in local theaters? What are we trying to do with the app? And then tie back to how are we going to leverage Kubernetes to enable that and get that done? Then again, in the constructs like service mesh, just distributing cloud services overall. Hey, I want to move this out to the edge, or I want to have it at the network edge, or I'm just going to have it in a CSP, or why am I going to do multiple CSPs? All that goes down or back up to what is the goal for this app and for the set of apps? What are you trying to do for the business? Digital transformation is way overused now for several years, but in the end, if you're trying to do that, all these constructs go back to what are you trying to do to digitize your business or a business process. I think you can't lose track of that and being that down in the weeds. What are you trying to do? And then based on that, how are all these tools going to help you get there? Maybe a monolithic app in some cases probably no, but maybe is the answer to it. Or maybe it's one CSP, or maybe you got to think of those things. I think we can't lose track of what are you trying to do for the business versus I'm loving this open source community and I got to dig it in because everyone else did. Or not even open source, just community in general. Go back to what are you trying to accomplish and what's the right architectures to get you to do that.
All right. So other than hanging on your website per se, what's your best advice to people right now as we look at all these cloud native technologies and microservices and alphabet soup of open source projects coming down the pike? How do I kind of wrap my head around it to do something that is an actionable strategy?
Yep. I mean, honestly, what I've seen, and now in my last few years getting in this part of the business, some of these communities are great. I mean, it's again come from proprietary systems for several decades, and you're fighting and you're not sharing. But these days, your CNCF, your KubeCon, some of these, other things around Linux Foundation, but some of these communities, folks really are doing and sharing in ways that I have not seen in prior areas of IT over the years. I think doing that, jumping in, asking questions, some of these meetups, again, vendors try to do a good job of some of these. Again, just the CNCF webcasts just did one last week. But some of these actually, it's way more open than I've seen it. So I think just doing that with your peers, here's my thought, here's my use case without getting proprietary. What do you think? So many folks dive in. How did this work? This is, hate to say it, tripled up what you did on a Yelp or a Nextdoor and chatting with your neighbors. How can I get this, find this, I need this? Having these dialogues, I have not seen this since the last few years. I've never seen this in IT or, ever. So I think that's a great way to do this. Bounce off, what do you think? And people will be just so open and honest with you. That would be my advice after going to Volterra.io.
All right. So just jump right in there and be part of the scrum, as they say.
Be part of the scrum and just be there, ask, bang, direct. I'm even thinking of this, and folks will just, do that, give you feedback. Maybe you can become the topic. If it's mainstream, maybe you become the topic of a meetup or one of the topics of a meetup, and people can diagnose your issue and give you thoughts if what you have, you're okay sharing. That could be a neat way to get some feedback. I bet you a lot of them would welcome that.
Hey, Mark, thanks for being on the show.
Mike, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And happy holidays.
All right. Kicking it back to you guys in the studio.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with David Safai, who's the CEO of Trilio. David, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
All right, you guys are specializing in data protection around Kubernetes, and you just landed $15 million in additional funding. Congratulations on that. Now that you bought everybody a virtual beer, what's the plan?
Yeah, I wish. No, it's been an exciting time for us. It's been a lot of building in this past year, which has led up to this. It's been building of this platform, and we've announced our 2.0 product line, and we've been building our ecosystem and partnerships, and then building team. With this funding, we need to go further, faster, farther, and that means attracting really good talent. And I think now is just a really great time in this market to bring on quality talent.
You were early on this conversation about data protection needing to be native on Kubernetes. What does that mean exactly? And why should people be paying attention to that particular aspect of this? Because we've been doing data protection now for 3 decades, maybe more, maybe not well, but we've been doing it.
Right. Well, you're aware our roots are in the open infrastructure space, and it feels a little like Groundhog's Day for us when we were in the OpenStack world, and people would enter into this cloud native journey and saying, oh, everything will be stateless and it's nirvana. We know that's not the case ever. But the thing about microservices is that
well, while you may not have an application that fails entirely, you need to recover even faster, and the ability to do that. And so you need to have and understand cloud native applications. It's a different mindset that the traditional or legacy folks really don't comprehend.
And what is that? Because we've been talking about mean time to recovery and mean time to points of objective forever. In a cloud native world, how has that changed?
Yeah, I think it's, if you go back to what our mantra has always been, and it's really applicable to this, is when we've set out across our product lines entirely, everything that we do is software only, it's agentless, it's forever scalable, it's native to every environment we touch. So you're driving on all the APIs of that environment. It's self-service, it's multi-tenant or multi-cluster, right? It's DevOps friendly, and it's an open backup schema. And I know this sounds like a mouthful, but it really is very much relevant to this world, right? You want the ability to build an application and just define a set of services that you're going to tag to it. And so Twilio has to be as native to that application as possible. And that goes as far as being able to deploy our solution with one single line of code. Apply one line in a Helm chart and, off and running there you are, because you, the application owner, while you may not care about, you're untethered from the underlying infrastructure, I just want to define the set of services that I need for my application. And so we've always had that mindset from day one. And, the journey into Kubernetes for us started, now it's over 2.5 years ago, where a lot of the big logos that we protect said, we're about to embark on this journey. We love your approach. Can you do this for Kubernetes? And so we took a really hard look. We started over, we wrote the first line in Go, and with help of partners in the background, we made sure that we had, when we do launch the product, which we did in July, that it had the right product market fit, and it was the right solution for the right people. And now we're starting to hear that real drumbeat of, look, I'm about to go into production. We need to start thinking about backup.
And what kind of apps are going into production? Because historically, we've had this stateless versus stateful debate going on forever. And a lot of people were like, well, we're just going to use stateless and we'll store it somewhere else and we'll do the data protection around that other thing. Are we seeing more stateful data on the Kubernetes clusters themselves?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think you're seeing a series of things, right? Look, the second you introduce a database, it's stateful, right? Because things are going to change there. But I also think that you have to look at it this way. When you're entering into a cloud native world, right, you're going to, again, going back to what I just mentioned before, defining that application, the components of that application. And then I have the ability now to stamp out that application into a number of environments at once. And so I think a lot of what we're hearing across the board is I need the ability to recover at scale, and I need the ability to recover across a number of environments consistently. And that requires a line of intelligence, because now I'm stamping out an application that not only gives me kind of this elastic compute, but now I've got data everywhere. And I'm curating data from a number of places. So Twilio, right, we capture the application and its data you think of it as a time machine, for lack of a better term. Now you can do that at scale, and you can do it consistently and efficiently. So that's what we're seeing.
Do you think we're going to see something that feels like Kubernetes sprawl coming down the pike, or maybe we're already starting to move down that path? On the other hand, you hear people talking about monster clusters. So what's going to be the right mix?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. Kubernetes becomes the platform of platforms, right? So people are going to start building a number of things off of Kubernetes, another series of platforms. And the beauty of it does provide you the ability to, and I don't want to use the term sprawl, because if you have, as this world matures, the right cloud native management tools and platforms will exist that'll provide for those controls. We just released in this latest in 2.0 a UI platform. And this UI platform gives you the ability to manage your Kubernetes applications in multiple clouds. So it's a multi-cloud, cloud-native data protection platform. So as a single end user, as an end user, as a tenant, I could have deployed my applications, yes, across a number of clouds and clusters. I may have used a number of different types of distributions and different ways I've deployed that application, whether it's to a home or an operator. And I may have used a number of different types of storage targets. These things will happen, right? As people kind of go through their journey, as organizations go through their journey, and you're gonna have different skill sets and things. So I think what becomes more important are the management platforms in place that allow for that control. So a sprawl, or, perhaps I did this on purpose, right? I wanted to deploy across environments. We've had customers in certain governance and compliance based industries that say, I have to deploy an application in multiple clouds. So there is no lock-in. The challenge that I have is, how do I control that? And going back to your point, and this is where we really do help the end user. And whether it's that DevOps person that's may want to test an application in multiple clouds, or now it's that IT ops person or that VP who's got the need a single source of truth across multiple clouds. These platforms are going to become more and more important as time goes on. And it's not just Kubernetes. It'll be, eventually, as you start to think about things like a serverless and a number of other items come into the cloud native party.
Hold that thought. The neighbor's kids are running by. All right. And noisy they be. All right. Do you think ultimately this will become part of the DevOps motion, or will there be some sort of administrator for Kubernetes who's using these tools who will handle that function because maybe the DevOps people think that this is beneath them? Or is there some place in the middle where all this might meet?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because I think if you look at that lineage, right, that chain from or the life cycle of an application, when you start from DevOps and you find your way to the SREs of the world and all the way out to IT ops, the need is different along that continuum. Now, the DevOps folks, a lot of the time, backup's not even part of their lexicon. However, if I gave you the ability to easily use a tool that allow you to rewind an application and its associated data that you were testing with, or take that application, clone it, or take that application and migrate it to a number of various clouds to see what performance could be like or is like, that becomes a powerful tool. And Trilio's approach here is, we've got our go-to-market is a freemium model. We give you the ability to download up to 10 nodes, keep it for free, keep it forever. And that's really for a lot of the DevOps folks. If I can give you the best backup tool in the world, you may take it. And if you want to use it, go ahead and use it. Use it for testing and use it for performance reasons. But as that application finds its way down that spectrum or that continuum, now the SREs may have a different need, right? They want to break the application and recover that application. Maybe see again the resiliency of that application in multiple clouds. And then again, as I find my way to IT ops, now once you're at IT ops, going back to that UI that I mentioned before, you now have workflows and processes, not CLI, which perhaps a lot of the DevOps folks care to drive a lot of their applications and testing with it.
Do you think we'll get to some kind of integration of data protection and security? We've been talking about this now for 2 decades, but if this is all starting to come together around a more of a programmatic motion, can I get to the point where there's a security event, and then as part of a DevSecOps process, I'm kicking off some kind of backup in case it's a ransomware attack or whatever. Will this finally converge?
Absolutely, absolutely. I spent a lot of time in the security space. My former life, I was a VC and having funded a bunch of cyber-based companies, and the whole time I've always believed that both of these worlds, whether it's coming from the IT side or the cyber side, will converge. There is a significant crossover. The thing about cyber and security is that recovery is just as important of a conversation to have as it is to protect an application. So to your point around ransomware, 100%, this should be a part of that conversation. And Trilio right now is taking a number of steps in the background that will be focused on the ransomware component here to make sure that your backups are completely secure.
What will ultimately differentiate who in the category in the last, 3 months? I think there's been a couple acquisitions, bunch of new players. There's more activity here now than I can remember in the last, 5 KubeCons. So what's going on?
Yeah. So, relative to, I could say from our world in the data protection space, I could say with a lot of conviction that people that have initially adopted free open source tooling have hit a glass ceiling. And they've hit a glass ceiling because these applications are finding their way to production even faster now, which is great for Trilio, right? At the end of the day, I give you, assurance that 100% of my 110% of my time is focused on giving you the best backup solution possible, right? And so this is becoming a very common conversation. And so we start to bridge the gap between a lot of the community stuff into IT. So I think that conversation is going to come up quite a bit. People growing out of certain tools, and that's why you're seeing a lot of funding in the space, not just for the TAM of it all, but for the need. Right, there is a need for now more mature products.
All right. Other than hanging out on your website, what's your best advice to the end customer right now in terms of how to think through this, get ready for this kind of cloud native data protection conversation, and maybe shift their mindsets a little? How do I get there?
Yeah. So from a Trilio perspective, right, while applications that may have been born in the cloud, Trilio was born for the cloud. And because of that, we want end users to rest assured that this should just be part of what you do when you're building an application. You should have this as tooling in the background. But 2, feel confident that when you deploy, regardless of the scale, regardless of however many different pieces of infrastructure that application goes into, and we talk multi-cloud, but the thing about multi-cloud is for all of its benefits, there are so many new challenges multi-cloud creates, right? Whether it's new attack vectors, whether it's governance, whether it's performance, right? And the business outcomes of all of that. We're talking about the whether it's ransomware or net performance scores, right? People have to want to feel confident that they can use your product, right? Or even getting products to market faster. So multi-cloud creates all these new vectors of issues. Take a step back. Think about the proper platforms that you need and tooling that you need from day one. And that starts even from the DevOps side of the house. That's where we want to go. I think a lot of the backup vendors think in the traditional aspect of, you don't need to talk to me until you're going to production. That's not true at all. This should be a day one conversation. Just because, this new world of Kubernetes, it's easy to consume, easy to deploy, right? Easy to manage. So why not start with a hardened environment? So.
All right. Hey, David, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
All right, that wraps it up for another edition of TechStrong TV. Check back with me, with us on Monday. We'll have a new episode for you. Until then, please, everybody, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.